hereby call this retreat to order. What? Vicky said I could. All right, then we're getting started.
We have quorum.
We do? Yeah, we do. The sheets are good. Okay. Town manager? Okay, we're not doing this. Well, what the hell? I mean, are we starting or not?
We can start.
5:45, right?
Foremost, welcome. Okay, that me? I didn't. Okay, I'll back off. Sorry about that technology. Welcome to the revised 2026 winter retreat. Appreciate your flexibility. Also want to say thank you to our staff for their flexibility in swinging some things around, particularly to Kayla and Kimberly, who I'll introduce in a second. Kimberly showed up on Tuesday and everything just went kablooey. So, but she came back Wednesday, so that's a win. So again, we are in here tonight, and we will deal with the alternative transit study tonight. Tomorrow, we will be meeting at East Ridge at 150 Perimeter Park Drive. So at the very dead end of Perimeter Park Drive, they have a space that Kayla secured for us there. It's good to not always be in this room, I think. So it gives you a place to go, and we'll settle in there. So we will begin at 10:30 tomorrow morning with Councilmember Kessling and Councilmember Patel for a budget overview. The other 5 of you are not required, but we are certainly not going to tell you you can't be there. And then around 11:30, lunch will arrive, and we will get started 12 or shortly thereafter. If you are coming closer to 12, you can certainly eat while we start. That first 30-minute session will be me and the 7 of you, like we've done in the past. And we'll talk through how do we want to handle some basic rules about the retreat, and maybe even we'll look again. You remember 2 years ago, we did a spreadsheet of when people want to be contacted, how they want to be contacted. So we'll update that, particularly given new members. And then we'll go on from there, covering the majority of the topics that were already addressed, with the exception that we pushed a couple topics to the Tuesday meeting, which I'll mention in a second, and then one other that we'll get onto a calendar at some point. We just haven't done that yet. So weather-wise, right now we are expecting the storm to begin on Saturday afternoon or evening, to really continue through most of Sunday. What we heard on our briefing with the county today was that less and less chance of snow, more and more chance of ice. I'm not sure if there's a better option there. Ice is not good. But again, we will meet again tomorrow morning as staff, and then we have one more briefing tomorrow at 1 again. We'll be making decisions by then on, we will probably potentially close some things early on Saturday. This is almost all Parks and Rec now. They have a number of things scheduled, which is good news, other than when you have to potentially postpone. So we will get that out, and then I fully expect we're just going to close anything that was scheduled for Sunday. It sounds like it's going to be pretty treacherous. And then we will make a decision tomorrow that we may just go ahead and delay Monday morning as well to be safe. I mean, MAFC is supposed to open at like 6 in the morning. I don't think that's going to be smart. So we'll get all that to you as soon as we get that all figured out. It may be during the day while you're here with us for retreat. All right. So behind some of you and across from some of you is our new Deputy Town Clerk. Kayla, would you like to do an introduction and highlights?
This is Kimberly Kwanek. She's our new Deputy Town Clerk. Kimberly has a very dedicated history of public service. For the past 5 years, she was a teacher, a middle school teacher. Before that, she was a social worker. Kimberly brings a huge dedication to public service. She also brings a wonderful set of skills that we're very excited. I'm thrilled that she's joining us, and I hope you all get a chance to meet her if you haven't already.
The last 2 things are just sort of housekeeping. One is you each have at least one thing in your mailbox if you'd like to check those tonight, or we're happy to bring that in on a break if you'd like. I know there's not a lot of extra space, but if you want to check that, please, you all got at least something. And then just a reminder, at some point tomorrow, we're going to circle back on dais seating. So just a suggestion, that might be during a break conversation to move us towards that being resolved tomorrow if we can. Thank you. Brett, the show is yours.
All right. All right, good evening. Brett Martin, Transportation Project Manager with the town. To my left is Philip Vereen, our Senior Transportation Planner, who I introduced back in November to the council. So today, we're gonna dive in a little bit deeper on a lot of the why, some of the constraints that we're working within for both producing the study, the alternative transit study that we carried out over the course of 2025, and then some of the things that limit what we can do or that we have to pay attention to or considerations that we have to take into account when we look at the future of public transportation, town commissioned public transportation service in the town of Morrisville. And just for some historical context on the alternative transit study, it was kicked off in the winter of 2025, so very early 2025. The first touch point with the council was in February of 2025, where staff, I wasn't here with the town at that time, I started in March, so. But the town staff came to the council to discuss the scope. This is what we're gonna be doing. Yes, thank you. I think I'm loud enough anyway. But to discuss the scope, this is what we're gonna do, what we're gonna take into consideration, where the study's gonna leave us, what our expected outcomes are, and all of that. And staff received some feedback from the council then, and then there was another touch point with the council in June. And that was after the first phase of public engagement, so the engagement results from that phase were shared. That phase, we'll get more into this as we go through the presentation, but just kind of giving a general overview of the history here. Also received council feedback at that time that would then kind of help us with the steering of the direction of the study from there. And then we came back with the final report and final recommendations in November at both meetings. And it became apparent that, public transportation, it's probably the reason I'm very attracted to it, is admittedly not a very simple thing. There's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of issues. It's not as easy as just being like, well, this is what we want, and so that's what we're gonna do. So what I'm trying to do today is fill in a lot of the gaps. Admittedly, there were a lot of things that weren't necessarily shared or couldn't be gleaned from the touch points that we had with council in February, June, and then November, and then from the alternative transit study final report that you received. So the idea is there's a whole lot more behind the scenes or that we have to take into consideration and that kind of push us with our steering of where we go that I think we need to share with the council. And then, so I'll go through that, and then toward the end, I'm trying to, I kind of time this to be half and half. I'll cover content for about half of the session and then turn it over to council to discuss, ask questions, provide feedback, and kind of coalesce around maybe what you want to do moving forward for the other half of the session. So that's generally how this will play out. And just real quick before I really get into things here, I have put throughout the presentation breaks where, okay, I've gotten through a good amount of content. You'll see a slide that says council questions and then break question mark. So, I'll leave it to the mayor and the council to determine, oh yeah, we're feeling a break. Let's go have a break. So if not, that's fine too. So anyway, I'll just go ahead and jump into this. All right, so just for the agenda today, first in this kind of introductory part, I'm going to cover what our session objectives are and our timeline for next steps. Then I'm going to get into, I've divided this up into parts, the presentation and the content that we're dealing with today. So first going to take a step back and cover Morrisville's transit planning and transit service history, really just going back to the late 2010s, and the transit service planning principles that drive service model consideration and implementation. And then in part two, we'll get into factors and feasibility constraints that influence the direction of both the 2025 alternative transit service study. So for both the study and then also the direction it's pointing us for or pointing us toward in terms of recommendations. And then we'll get into part 3, which is within that study, what went into the service delivery model development, the evaluation results and the evaluation framework that we laid out, which you saw back in November, and then go through the recommendations again. And then part 4 will be council discussion and feedback. Okay. So our session objectives, I know this is a long list, but this is really what I'm trying to accomplish with this today, is really to establish a better understanding today that may not have come out in our prior touch points with the council. And this would cover Morrisville's transit service and planning history, original service objectives when public transportation was studied in the past, and some of the decision-making and the why behind why we landed on the node-based microtransit service, and how they relate to current conditions, and then the study results and recommendations. I also want to take us through some performance issues and challenges with the current service levels. Yes, we have issues with the current service levels that we're providing with our current service model, and I want to talk a little bit about some of that. Feasible timelines for service change decision-making for the study's short-term and long-term recommendations. So what can you do on what timelines depending on which direction you want to go? Foundational transit service and operations planning principles and how they relate to the study's results and recommendations. How those planning principles, funding program guidelines and constraints, such as the community funding area program as part of the Wake Transit apparatus, some of what is involved in that and how it's kind of constraining what we can do. Other compliance factors that influence or limit the scope of the study and the next steps for any public transportation service that we want to take. How what we learned from the study in conjunction with those constraints pointed us in the direction that was recommended in the report and that we shared in November. And then what the study's final report does and does not do. And why? So we can achieve the following by February. Okay. So why do we want to establish a better understanding of these things? Well, really because I believe those are some of the missing pieces, as I mentioned, but also we have a time, if you want to see anything happen in terms of any changes, we have a timeline that we have to hit. And I'll go through that in a little bit more depth on the next slide, but really what we need to achieve by February in order to comply with that timeline is for there to be acceptance of the final report, and I'll talk about, certainly open to making some changes to the final report. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But they must comport with program and compliance constraints. And then a clear conceptual path forward. Doesn't have to be a specific path forward, but a conceptual path forward as it relates to scope, schedule, and budget for implementation of any short-term improvements, okay? What we don't need by February and can be put to rest and on the back burner is a decision on next steps for any long-term recommendations. So that would be further evaluation and refinement of fixed route service concepts. And I will tell you, just go ahead and say it, fixed route is inherently a long-term concept. It is not something that can be done in the short term. And I'll address that more also as I go through further content. So as part of that, as also for any type of fixed route concept that is laid out in the final report, we do not need specific routing or capital infrastructure siting for preferred fixed route service concept. We will continue to evaluate the feasibility of that and provide updates and feedback opportunities to council as necessary if council chooses to go in the direction of pursuing fixed route further. All right. Okay, so here's that timeline that I mentioned, and just to establish very early and upfront what our feasible timeline is for making any service changes that require a budget modification, such as the recommended smart shuttle improvements, with the hope that it elicits some degree of urgency if we expect anything to change. So we are here today at the council retreat, and I'm providing direction, or we're asking you to provide direction to finalize the report for acceptance, and then to prepare us for any short-term improvements, to take action on those short-term improvements. And by your February 24th council meeting, we would need for the council to consider acceptance of the final report and take action directing staff to pursue any next steps for short-term improvements. And as part of that, it would also include what we would need for the FY27 town budget, because this all costs money, and we need to make sure that we're factoring that into our budgeting process as you walk through that over the next several months. This is all aligning with really what is the critical path, what's setting the critical path, which is the deadline to submit any changes through the community funding area program, any budget changes that would need to be funded in FY27. This is when they are due. So if we want to do anything in FY27, we have to hit that date. Well, that's not 100% true, which I'll talk about in a moment, but that's for most of FY27. If we want to have something in place, we got to hit this date. And then we also, keep in mind, have to coordinate, if we are retaining our current operations contractor, which is technically Go Carry, because that's who we have an agreement with, but that's extended to MV Transportation, who provides the service for Go Carry. We have to notify them by June if we want to make service changes by October or November. The earliest we can make service changes under any scenario that you could possibly dream of is October, November of 2026. So I just want to make sure that's clear. One thing also, if we don't meet this deadline, we're pushing everything back really by about 6 months. So if we don't meet this deadline, it's possible that we could get something going by April. That would be our next available opportunity. But I will say it's harder based on how the community funding area program is set up, because this would be a request for the fiscal year 2027 work plan, and that's going through the process of being developed right now. If we waited and we don't hit this deadline, and we were trying to target that next available opportunity of April, it would be a work plan amendment. And work plan amendments are much harder to get approved, because it's kind of like, those requests are not being balanced with everything else at the same time to determine whether or not they're going to make it into the budget. So I just want to make sure that even though April still might sound great, if we don't hit this date, there's still a risk there. So I want to be clear about that. Also want to mention that the structural drivers of the timeline, so just to review the recommendations, the short-term recommendations, they are to increase the vehicles for the node-based microtransit system, because of course we have capacity issues, and then also increase the nodes. And the structural drivers of the timeline for node expansion are really independent of those for service improvements. But there still needs to be coordination between the two if we're going to do node expansion. Really, the best way to think about it is we don't want to expand nodes ahead of any service enhancements, but it's okay to do the service enhancements ahead of the nodes, if that makes sense. More detailed information on the timeline for the short and long-term improvements is provided later in the presentation, which I'll get to, and I want to make clear a fixed route service concept absolutely cannot be implemented by the fall of 2026. Okay. Some additional notes on the microtransit service improvements timeline. So we want the implementation of service improvements that are recommended to be piecemeal. And on the actual operational side, what we want to do, you may have heard me talking before about, you want to turn the dial one click at a time. There's a whole lot of different implementation pieces or elements that you could do to get to like a full realization of what the vision is, but you want to turn the dial just one click, wait a little bit, get some information, have performance from what you just did, the feedback from that inform whether or not you want to turn the dial another click. So we want to look at this in a piecemeal fashion, first implementing 2 vehicles during all service hours, and later implementing 3 vehicles during peak periods. So you want to do that in 2 phases. Also want to mention that it includes the transition to minivans to better fit the seating capacity that we actually need for the type of service that we're operating, which would match the actual shared ride demand, and also explore advanced booking options for targeted populations to start. So we're talking about seniors and persons with disabilities. those are the people, I just want to talk a little bit more about that. Those are the people that have more, if you think about it, they have greater vulnerability in terms of getting to a node, not, the hailing the smart shuttle, waiting there in the North Carolina heat, waiting there in an ice storm that's impending. And their ability to deal with those sorts of conditions with some of the reliability or waiting that they'd have to do is much less than others within our, community. So I just want to make sure that we understand that's the reason why we would target those first. And again, that's one click on the dial. Implementation of additional locations is also recommended to be piecemeal. We're thinking 4 to 5 nodes during FY27 and potentially all of the 9 recommended nodes by the end of FY28. And even if, I want to make this clear too, even if fixed route is a desired solution to pursue now, actual implementation will take 3 or more years and is limited by funding program guidelines, federal compliance considerations, and other constraints. And I will say 3 years is being sort of generous and very generous with the technical capacity that the town staff has at the moment. Just some examples, the city of Burlington, back when it started its transit service in the mid 2000 teens?
Yeah, 2017.
5 years. But they had more to build because they had to build a whole system with multiple routes. It took Apex at least 3 years. Apex actually did a pretty good job of moving forward pretty quickly as they could, but it took them more than 3 years. So I just want to make sure that we understand, like, even if you desire it now, it's going to take some time. Okay. Moving on to the transit planning and service history and transit service planning principles. And I do want to say, you do have additional, so you got a set of slides that I'm going to be presenting. And then you got additional supplemental slides with additional information separate from that. I'm going to be talking about, the slides that I'm presenting are what I'm going to go through, but I will be referring to some of the slides and information that I provide in the additional supplemental slides. So I just want to make that, bring some attention to that as I go through this. Those slides, in the slides, you will see a lot of information provided on the status of transit service in Morrisville back in the late 2010s, as well as information on the transportation challenges with relevance to public transportation provision and the market assessment for transit and some market assessments that were done with other studies. So just to summarize some of that information that you see before I get into the transit service history is really Morrisville was a transit service desert if you go back to 2018. There were some regional services up on the far north side of town that were primarily focused on serving the office uses on the north side of town, the northeast side of town, but that was pretty much it. Another thing with regard to the transportation challenges with relevance to public transportation, we have a very challenging street network for public transportation provision because we have limited overall street connectivity and roadway capacity for east-west travel. And just an example, there's a huge distance between where you can cross the railroad, right? This is not a mystery, but on the north side of town, you're pretty much McCrimmon or Hobson, and Hobson's not even in Morrisville, right? So there's a huge stretch there and that you have to navigate to one or the other to be able to cross east-west. And then you go from McCrimmon south to Aviation MCR. It actually gets better as you go to the south side of town. You have more opportunities. But that is one thing that is really constraining where we're at or what we can do. And if we were a grid street network without those constraints, a lot of transit models would be a lot easier to implement. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. There's also a lot of feasibility challenges for improving north-south roadway capacity on NC 54. As I'm sure you've noticed, in a lot of transportation planning that's been done over the past 10 plus years, there's a lot of avoidance of NC 54 with things. Our BRT, right? The recommended locally preferred alternative for the extension of the BRT from Cary to RTP avoids NC 54. It uses McCrimmon and comes back and meets NC 54 at the TOD site. But there's a whole stretch there of NC 54 where it's like, you're not moving, right? And that's no mystery. Also, another thing, Morrisville has a very limited internal commuting market. There's a lot of jobs in Morrisville. A lot of people commute in from outside, but a lot of those jobs are not occupied by people who live in Morrisville. And a lot of people that live in Morrisville commute out of Morrisville for work. The most common location they commute to is toward Raleigh. So there's really not a huge internal commuting market. And when you don't have a really strong internal commuting market, that's not a strong signal for fixed route suitability, because you're not really getting that mass transit effect that fixed route is designed for. And then also, as you know, we have residential neighborhoods that are very disconnected and distant from the core of trip generators along major thoroughfares in Morrisville as well. Sort of far-flung. Kitts Creek is not that far, it's just hard to get to, right? It's just because of that railroad connectivity issue. It's just hard to get to from the east side of town to the west side of town. So just wanted to cover those things with the commuting dynamic. Before we get into, I think that's pretty much what I'll just cover that. Another thing that you'll see in the supplemental is transit propensity in Morrisville. That was done for the 2025 study. Actually, Morrisville's transit propensity for a suburban community in relative to Wake and Durham counties is pretty good. It's pretty strong. If you take into consideration the transit propensity index that considers population density, different demographics, that sort of thing. But again, the commuter market is the lack of an internal commuting market sort of brings that down a little bit. There is a higher propensity east of NC 54 with propensity for transit propensity, because that's where just a huge cluster of jobs are. All right, so covered that. We'll get into the 2019 public transportation study. If we go back to kind of following up from that history of transit service in Morrisville and kind of what the town was trying to do about this transit service desert situation and different models to look at, the study was initiated by the town with funding from Wake Transit, the community funding area program, to evaluate options to fill a gap with community-focused transit service. As part of that, the study was really meant to evaluate feasible and viable options for community-focused public transportation service that would receive community funding area program funding. So that's important. I know that might not sound like much to you, but the important thing here is whenever the community funding area program gives money to an eligible entity to do a study, it's meant for the study to be done to bring something back to be eligible for the community funding area program. It's not meant for the municipality to go off and be like, oh, we're just going to do this, whether we, that's what it's meant for. So if we want money to do the study, that's part of the focus of where we need to look. It evaluated fixed route, advanced booking demand response, and real-time microtransit service models. It evaluated organizational models for service delivery and opportunities to partner with existing service providers, which is how we ended up with GoCarry as our provider. And it recommended a node-based microtransit service as a balance between characteristics of fixed route and advanced booking demand response. So just to review, what is fixed route? What is it suitable for? When do we look toward fixed route to be a viable solution? Well, it operates on a fixed path with a set schedule, which makes it very predictable and easy for users to understand. It's designed to serve important corridors and links, common destinations such as employment centers, high population areas, and activity centers. It really should be designed to operate on the most direct path possible to provide reasonable travel times and to improve productivity. It's all about high utilization per trip. So really also, this is kind of where that commuting market comes in. It should serve markets where customers use public transportation daily for consistent purposes, such as work trips or trips to major trip generators to ensure efficiency. So I mentioned work. work trips, because typically and traditionally, a lot of work trips were always taken, and a lot of them still are, generally within the same couple of hours a day, right? Like 7 to 8 a.m., somewhere, something like that, maybe 6 to 8 a.m., 6:30 to 8:30, and then there's another PM peak. That has changed a little bit with COVID. It changed a lot during COVID, but then coming out of COVID, people's travel patterns are very different than they were before COVID. And that's kind of playing into some of what we look at as well. Also, it doesn't have to be work. Disney World, you should see their transit system to get people from the resorts and all that in parking lots to the front gate of the facility. That, again, major trip generator, a lot of activity at certain times of day, very high ridership. There's a need for fixed route. Because of the focus on linking origins and destinations along more highly traveled corridors, one of the things to note about fixed route is you really back off on the ability to provide good geographic coverage for service, right? Because it's really focused on just that, providing service along along corridors with proximately located trip generators, origins, destinations, that sort of thing. And it also requires abundant stop access infrastructure. So a lot of bus stops, generally for local routes, for fixed route, just to plant the seed, you're looking at a stop every quarter to a third of a mile on both sides of a served roadway facility. And one thing I want to note about fixed route is there is a perception that fixed route is more reliable. And it is if it's designed appropriately, but it can be designed in a way where it's not reliable and it's not really giving you that many reliability benefits over something else. The longer the route, the less reliable it is. So just one rule to keep in mind. Okay, come on. There we go. All right. So just want to mention that back in 2019, the study did evaluate fixed route service concepts, two to be exact, and you see them drawn up here on the screen with the map. In accordance with established fixed route service planning standards, they were drawn, generally designed to operate on the most direct path possible to provide reasonable travel times and to connect approximately located origins and destinations along more highly traveled corridors. Although I will say I'm very suspicious about that for the orange route. You see it does a lot of zigzagging. Others, I think, in the transit profession are also very suspicious of that being designed for that purpose. But anyway, you get the idea. It's not designed to provide direct connections to dispersed neighborhoods or front door access to specific locations. Another thing that's important about fixed route is, and that was mentioned in that study, is it does require separate complementary Americans with Disabilities Act curb-to-curb service within 3/4 of a mile of the route. At the time, the capital cost assumption made with the 2019 study assumed that it would be $3.7 million for stop infrastructure and software. And it was not recommended because of the high cost, limited geographic coverage, and also because Morrisville was a transit service desert, there was no actual data of performance, showing performance of transit service within Morrisville. There was no empirical performance data on market viability. Okay, so we'll go to the next model, demand response. That was looked at in the 2019 study. This does not operate on a predetermined set path with a set schedule. It is less predictable than fixed route in that regard as well. This is a model where users typically book, the traditional demand response model is users book trips in advance, at least 24 to 48 hours. It is possible, though, to do demand response in real time, and it's generally curb-to-curb or door-to-door service. Traditionally, what happens is we get the trip schedulers will get these requests in advance. The 24 or 48 hours, they'll develop a routing and timing manifest for each day based on the trip request and trip demand that comes in. It provides pretty good flexibility for users to go anywhere within a defined geographic area, but because of the nature of the service, trips are less direct for individual riders with fewer passengers sharing trips to common destinations. And that increases on-vehicle travel time compared with fixed route, and certainly with the node-based microtransit as well. It's really suited for markets where customers use service for occasional purposes, not for those work trips or Disney World trips. So shopping, appointments, that sort of thing. But on the capital side, it is much less costly and capital intensive than fixed route. And Morrisville, the 2019 study showed that it's pretty much for demand response service, just the town boundaries, whatever's within the town boundaries, and then that, I don't know what you call it, exclave of Cary that juts into the town, and the town kind of is swallowing it to smooth the boundaries. But the service area you see on the map, it provided greater geographic coverage and access to origins and destinations than both fixed route and node-based microtransit. But one of the things about demand response, it is super, super difficult to manage demand and match supply with that demand on a daily basis. And it's really, really difficult in an operational manner to make sure you have the right number of operators lined up, the right number of vehicles lined up, that sort of thing on a day-to-day basis, so that you're actually getting some cost efficiency out of the service that you're providing. And that's another piece of that is it would impact wait time and travel time reliability. You can very easily overrun your capacity, and demand can snowball out of control with such what I call deconcentrated passenger access, because they can be picked up anywhere, curb to curb. That's pretty premium service. There's no separate complimentary ADA service required, because you can provide those trips the same way. The way you would provide those trips is the same way you're providing trips to everybody else. It wasn't recommended by the study because of capacity and associated cost uncertainty, like the likely need for more vehicles to serve more passengers in locations over a wide geographic area, and questions about attractiveness of the service requiring advanced booking. And then we looked at the real-time node-based microtransit service model. It does not operate, again, along a predetermined set path with a set schedule. It is less predictable than fixed route, but can be more predictable than traditional demand response with those set access locations, or the nodes. It is designed to respond actively to market trip origins and destinations where there is current demand throughout its span of service with real-time booking and trip manifests. It has the ability to provide greater geographic coverage and access to more dispersed origins and destinations than fixed route, but less than for traditional demand response. And I want to stop here with that point and just mention, though, there is a difference between access, density, and geographic coverage. Fixed route is actually involves higher access density. Remember I said every quarter of a mile to a third of a mile there would be a stop. That's higher access density than a node-based microtransit system. But the node-based microtransit system provides access to the town in more areas. And so there's more geographic coverage, right, than being concentrated on just one corridor, or a corridor here that juts over here, or that sort of thing. So I just want to make sure that we make that point. It is suited for markets where customers utilize the service for consistent purposes or occasional purposes, but not en masse. En masse, if they're doing it for consistent purposes, it ain't the thing to do. It's fixed route. Fixed route is the thing to do, if adequate capacity is provided. It also requires infrastructure at the set access locations, but it is less capital intensive than fixed route. Okay, and so the study recommended this as the preferred alternative to move forward with. And it initially recommended 19 node locations at initial service startup based on the evaluation of the most productive trip generators and travel patterns. It was to be powered by a trip booking and scheduling algorithm to optimize customer pickups and drop-offs and ensure that wait times and time on board are minimized. It was chosen also because it's easier to manage demand and match supply with demand on a daily basis than traditional demand response with those set pickup and drop-off locations. One way to think about the nodes is you want them to be in the best places to serve people the best that we can, but that is a huge demand management tool. You heard me talk about deconcentrated access. The more you deconcentrate access, the more demand you're going to have. And if you do it too much, it can overrun your capacity very easily, and it can snowball. So that's one thing to one concept to kind of think about with the nodes. Complementary ADA service is likely required, but it is easier to provide and schedule with the same vehicles being used to deviate from the nodes. So you're not really having to do something special on the side and pay for it. And then the mode is recommended because of the lower cost, scalability, and adaptability over time without a large initial investment. Again, greater geographic coverage with the demand being managed at set locations, and the ability to establish and monitor the use and trip data to determine the necessity for investment in other models. So this would be a good mechanism, and it was selected partially as the model to go with because, oh, well, we didn't have any empirical performance data because we were a desert, but this will allow us to get that, and you can evaluate that and see if we're fit for another model. So we'll move on real quickly, and I'll go through these next slides pretty quickly. So our performance. With the materials for the retreat item, you should have also received the biannual Smart Shuttle Performance Report for the whole year of 2025 compared to prior years. So that should have been in your packet for this. In order to get a full story of the needs for our transit system, it's important to cover some of the most relevant metrics to the system's success and the passenger experience. And so we will do that. So if we look at the ridership, just ridership in general, ridership growth persisted from launch through 2024, but it has since trended downward from 2024 to 2025. The percentage of completed rides to the requested rides, so when somebody on their app, they're like, I want a ride, and it gives them a trip proposal, and it might say 12 minutes, it might say 40 minutes, it might, it depends on what the demand is that's coming in. They can accept that ride, or they can say, no, that ain't gonna work for me. So the percentage that you see up there is of the trip proposals that are provided to the customer, what percentage of those are being accepted? And you see it has steadily declined year after year since initial launch, which tells you that there are more and more issues that people are having with it's not working for them, right? Great, you gave me this trip proposal, that ain't gonna work. But it's still more than half. So it's still working for a good number of people. Also want to mention, one thing that we've done a better job of over the past 4 years is the percentage of shared rides has increased, which a shared ride meaning you have more than one customer on the vehicle at a time taking a trip. From 46% to now over half, we're pushing 60% in 2025. Okay. Average wait time for the shuttle, again, this is what's playing into whether or not people are going to accept the trip proposal. This is probably the number one factor for whether people are going to accept the trip proposal. That has steadily increased since initial launch, and it has crossed what we have identified as the critical 30-minute threshold in 2025. And people's tolerance really start for waiting and being able to, this sort of thing working for their schedule, it really starts to tail off after 30 minutes, okay? We also get a high percentage of the complaints that we have gotten. We actually did a complaint analysis. It's in your additional supplemental information packet during 2025. Most of those concern wait times and the ability to book a ride. Which is what we would expect. One thing I will say with this data that you see there is back in June of 2023, the queuing length for a ride was lengthened from 40 minutes to 60 minutes. So just factor that into the data because there was a time before June of 2023 where you could not get a ride that was more than 40 minutes if the estimated time of arrival was more than 40 minutes. So, okay. Performance since initial launch, this is really just getting at that tolerance that I mentioned about the 30-minute wait time. You see the completed trips, not accepted, canceled, no-showed. And really, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you see once you get to the greater than 30-minute wait time there, moving from the 25 to 30, you see how much more that red bar starts to pop there. So user behavior tells us that not accepting trip proposals and canceling requests and all that increases with increasing wait times. Now here's the good thing, or a good thing. Our average travel times during which users are on the shuttle have generally stayed in the 13 to 14 minute range since initial launch. And that is actually a very highly competitive travel time for a transit service area. If you can get the ride and you're not, and you know, if you're willing to wait, or maybe you are able to get a ride and not have to wait that long, once you get on the shuttle, this is a very competitive travel time for a 9 square mile, 10 square mile area. So, okay, when we look at travel patterns, you've seen this before, I'll go through it pretty quickly. Travel patterns and ridership by node. This is a graphic or a map that's showing for each node the number of pickups to drop-offs. And then also you see those lines that are connecting them. That's what node, that's origin destination pairs for the nodes. So how strongly related are the travel patterns between nodes? And we call those desire lines in transit planning. That's because it's the desire of where people want to go based on what's available to them. So most nodes are balanced. I think we've covered that Wake Tech has a kind of an imbalance with pickups and drop-offs before, but really the main thing I want to point out here is the Regional Transit Center, Park West Village, Morrisville, Carpenter Road, Davis Drive, and Kremen Corners, and Wake Tech are the highest ridership locations. And if I didn't know anything about this and you were to just say, Brett, here's a map, point out the highest ridership locations, I would have guessed exactly that, because that's what you would expect based on the type of trip generators that they are. Perimeter Park, Wake Competition Center, BAPS, the campus, and HSNC are the lowest. If you asked me the same thing that I just mentioned, before COVID, I would have said Perimeter Park should be higher. But now, because of the travel patterns with white-collar jobs, not as much. There's a very stark difference in ridership at nodes that are west of NC 54 versus east of NC 54. And one of the things that the 2019 public transportation study evaluated and pointed out is there actually is not a very strong relationship between the west side of Morrisville and the east side of Morrisville. There's not. And part of what contributes to that is the connectivity challenges, right? So just wanted to make sure that you don't see a lot of travel relationship there, right? And one thing I do want to point out to you is for approximately 9 square mile service area, our node density is actually pretty low. It's pretty low. There's not really a lot of node-based microtransit systems out there, but in most cases, the access that's provided over a set square mileage or a set area is typically higher than what we're doing. You see that there's a strong desire for crosstown connections, as I mentioned. You see those lines are really going all across town there. There's some short trips and a strong desire for short trips, but you see the highest origin destination pairs there listed as well. All right, what is our service demand throughout the year, week, and day? Well, our highest demand in ridership generally is in June to October. The lowest is right now, December to February. Tuesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays are the highest service demand days in 2025 respectively. Sundays, Wednesdays, and Mondays are the lowest. The highest demand throughout the day is 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And just very general capacity that we provide is 1 vehicle from the start of service at 7 a.m. and that goes on to 1 p.m., then 2 vehicles from 1 to 7, and then 1 vehicle from 7 to 9. And just so you know, and I think I've said this before to the council, I am not aware of any microtransit provider operating just 1 vehicle during service hours, and certainly not in a service area of 9 square miles, which is a pretty large service area. So that is contributing to some of our wait time reliability problems. Actually, it's contributing a lot to it. Okay, almost done to the first break. Okay, so this, of course, we had these issues that we've identified after 4 years of performance. Actually, at the time, it was 3 years of performance when the study was first envisioned, I guess. So the town wanted to commission another study to evaluate that and to kind of tell us where should we go from here. And it was initiated by the town, with funding from the Community Funding Area Program to carry out a transit feasibility study to evaluate the town's evolving transit needs through an analysis of different models and/or ways to enhance the performance of the current Morrisville Smart Shuttle. The basis of it, of course, is several concerns with the existing Smart Shuttle service, including on-time performance, the inability to meet demand, and inadequate funding to expand the current system. And so as part of the Community Funding Area Program, the study was to evaluate feasible and viable options for addressing the town's community-focused public transportation service that would receive, CFAP funding. So it was, we're going to give you money to do this study because you want funding, and through the Community Funding Area Program. So here's the money, come up with something feasible and viable for the program. So I just want to make sure we're clear on that again. The scope of work was developed by town staff with input from the Campo Community Funding Area Program administration staff, GoCarry, again, our current provider, and other stakeholders. And it was shared and verified with town council in February, as I mentioned earlier. And we engaged VHB. You've seen the consultants come in and provide updates and such, and do presentations. They were engaged in 2024 and carried out the study between February and November. One thing I want to mention, and we're almost to our questions and break, is before that is the scope elements for the study, and the objectives of those elements are provided in your supplemental information packet as well. So if you want to dig into that and see, okay, what are the scope elements? How was this designed, the study and all that? You can see that. I do want to mention that, again, the study was not intended or really even permitted to back into a predetermined service model solution. The reason for that is, well, if you knew what you wanted to do, then why did you need this study, and why did we give you money for it? That would be the CFAP mentality or attitude toward it. And it's also not designed or intended to identify specific full design operational alignment alternatives, infrastructure specific locations for infrastructure siting and that sort of thing. Those are all things that come along with implementation planning after you've solidified a concept. So, and that will take us to questions or a short break. Yeah,
Sorry.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Brett. That was fabulous. A lot of good
Councilmember
information.
Johnson. Thank you. And council, as you begin questions, please turn on
Thank
your
you.
mics.
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. That was a lot of really good information. Thank you for taking us back so we remember how far we've come. And you said a couple of times, and you repeated it now, that the funding for this study is to help figure out what community funding area program could fund in the future. So if the study comes out and has a recommendation, and then we go and ask for something that goes against the recommendation, what happens?
There has to be a planning justification for what the town wants to do if they're asking for money from that entity. So the study can say whatever in terms of the recommendation, but it has to align pretty well with these things are pointing us in that direction through the planning process. That would be, if you wanted to do something different, it's probably fine, but we would need to put together that planning
Strong
justification.
Yeah. Okay. Because I think we've talked about this before. The ability to get additional funding through the Community Funding Area Program is really desirable. I'm hoping we can take advantage of that. So I want to make sure that we're following along and doing what we should be doing. Obviously, we need to make sure that it benefits Morrisville and our residents, but I want to make sure that we're proceeding where we're going to end up getting that additional funding to help us enhance the program through additional vehicles, more nodes, whatever it takes to enhance this service. Okay, thank you.
Oh, Councilmember Patel.
Oh, that was a good presentation. I think this is the first time Councilmember Harrison and I also had a conversation with you. I had asked about getting the demographic information about the ridership from the app, and I believe you have stated that it may be possible. Have you looked into it?
I'm sorry, can you,
Demographic. The demographic information of the riders.
right, so we have not, the town has not been collecting that, but we should. And
it
it's
is
something we,
possible.
right, the demographic information of a ridership. One of the things that we sort of need to correct is that we don't have a Title VI program for our transit system, and we should. And that's one of the things that you would do through a Title VI program is survey your ridership to understand the demographics, their demographics. Who are you serving? Really, the reason why it's required as part of a Title VI program is anti-discrimination. But there's so many other things that you could use it for, right? And to make good decisions about if you know who you're serving, the types of people you're serving. But we do want to institute that, but we haven't.
If I could note, and this would have been before you started, Brett, it was probably year 1 or 2 of the service. We have the ability to push surveys out through the app. So we did do demographic surveys and we got some demographic information early on. But it's definitely time to do some more of that.
Is it possible to collect that information at the time users first install or start using the app?
It should be pretty easy to get that information. I mean, when something's app based, it's so much easier to get information from people than other methods. But yeah, it should be pretty easy to get that, and we could start doing that. The thing is, though, is we don't have a Title VI program. And when I say Title VI program, that's a very specific thing that's required. That lays out a number of different things, and that's part of the program. I don't know if it's a good idea for us to start doing it. I mean, I guess we could before we lay out the other required elements of the program. I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's
Do you have any thoughts on that? You've worked with that.
I would concur with Brett as far as needing that. I do agree with you. We do need to look at demographic data from the standpoint of not just who we're serving, but also we're talking about planning forward as well, especially when. And demographics is we're talking about seniors, we're talking about youth, we're talking about, understanding the ebbs and flows. Like, do we have summertime? We see a dip or increase in the summer with students riding versus seniors, so we can basically extrapolate more and more data so we can basically study for future progress in terms of spending by services. So, yeah.
So time of day, right? What type of users are using transit during which time of the day?
Correct. So, I do concur with, looking at, expanding the view of data to, really dovetail to what Brett said earlier about looking not only short term with services, but long term as well.
Thank you.
Oh, Mayor Pro Tem Ravati, sorry.
Thank you. So just a couple questions. I agree. This is a really good presentation. I've managed to learn a lot every time you present it. I feel like, I don't know, it's just better to hear it more than once. Did I understand you correctly to say that it would be better to have a plan in place before we started collecting demographics?
Well, there's a lot of pieces of a Title, so when I say Title VI program, there's a whole outline of here's all the pieces and elements that you need to have with that. And they need to fit together and work together. But I don't think that, just thinking about how that works and the reason for it, that there's anything that should preclude us from beginning demographic surveying as soon as we can, without having those other elements in place.
Well, because my thought was that the demographics would be integral to the plan. Like, I don't, I think that we'd be missing a step if we have the ability to collect the demographics, and then we also want to make changes to the service, which would affect ridership. I think that knowing what the ridership is now would be an integral part of any changes that we made, any decisions that we made about changes. Also, so I noticed that we keep talking about the vans, and I really like that idea. I think that's a great idea, and we would be able to expand service, and it might, it'd be nice if it was a wash, but, for not the same money that we would pay if we just added another bus. But, so, I'm just a little bit concerned. Can you just explain exactly what that would look like? So, do we sell the bus and buy vans, and then, we can't get the bus back without buying one? Or, how easy is it to transition from buses to vans? And if ridership increases significantly, we want to go back to buses. Can you just sort of explain that whole process for me?
Yeah, so with our current operations provider contract we have with GoCarry, of course, they contract with MV. We don't purchase our vehicles, and neither does GoCarry. MV purchases the vehicles, and we pay through our hourly rate the cost of capital depreciation.
So I guess we can't sell them then.
Right. But for this scenario, when we, of course, through this study, have been coordinating very closely with GoCarry, what can we do? What, how would this work? How would that work? They could pretty easily, actually what they want to do, and they've been pushing me, and I'm like, well, we don't have a council decision yet. We don't have, we're still working with the council, is they want to take the vehicles we have now and put them on Apex's fixed route expansion or frequency improvements. And then, but also order the vans separately, or ask MV to order the vans separately. The vans have a really, really short, relatively speaking, lead time for delivery. They're much easier to get. They're Chrysler Voyagers or something like that. So they're pretty easy to get. However, if you want to go back in the other direction, it's the lead time to get what's called a light transit vehicle, which is what we're operating now, is a lot longer.
Okay.
So it's not as it's pretty nimble to go smaller, but it's not as nimble to go larger.
I guess that wouldn't concern me as much, because presumably there wouldn't be thousands of people, week one. There would be a gradual buildup of service. So we would just want to keep an eye on that and decide, what the metric is, where the threshold is that's going to trigger conversations about new buses.
Right.
The understanding that it's going to take a while to get a new bus.
Yeah, it won't be as much as one of those urban coaches, but it still is more lead time. When I worked for the Federal Transit Administration, there was actually you might know this, there was a 24-month backlog of LTVs, because there was a time when the chassis for them was not made anywhere in North America.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's been rectified quite a bit. Correct. So there's issues like that pop up, but we would try to be as nimble. You're right. It's not going to sneak up on you. So.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Councilmember Vicki Johnson Scroggins.
Scroggins Johnson.
Scroggins Johnson, sorry.
Yes. Oh, the other Johnson. Couple questions. I know that we do collect ridership information based on rider or not, and I agree we need to have a better transparency into the type of rider, because we're setting policy based on prioritization of seniors and people that do not drive, and, later in the presentation, we'll be going into more detail. But if I don't know what our current baseline is, it's, assumptions that we're making that may or may not really be the situation that we're facing today. We're also setting our pricing point for ridership to 0 based on our target population. So there's a cost ultimately in not knowing, and there's going to be a cost ultimately in finding out who our ridership is. Because when we budget, we're looking at vehicles, we're looking at total cost of service, but I think we also have to think about the cost of finding out who our riders are. We don't have that information today, but we do have to expend energy and potentially cost to determine, how we collect that in a way that is not discriminatory, but yet is transparent to the management of the service and ultimately the policymakers that are setting direction. So I hope that covers some of the same items that enter alignment with what's been said. How do we gauge success? So I heard that we are looking at just routes and target populations, but how do we gauge success of our target population if we don't know who they are? How do we gauge success of ridership if we're not really clear on what people need? So somehow we want to set success priorities in addition to doing some of these high-level strategic goals. As a council and as a town, how do we gauge success? And that can be short-term and long-term. And then finally, I have a question about the vans. Are they ADA compliant? I know that there's some restrictions, or drivers don't have to be as strongly licensed with the vans as they do with the bus microtransit. So how does that play into this scenario with our target population?
Yeah, so the vans, yeah, they're required to be ADA compliant, and they would be. In terms of the operators, the only difference is CDL versus not a CDL. That just has to do with who's permitted to operate a certain size vehicle with a certain number of, a certain capacity for passengers. The minivans don't have to have a CDL driver. There is a lower cost because of that as well. They're much less, in general, they're much less expensive to operate. We're talking more about what that means, though, with our current arrangement with Go Carry a little later. But yeah, like I wouldn't say that there's really anything that I would look at as worrisome about making that switch and the type of operators that are involved in operating them. Everybody has to be drug tested. There's alcohol and drug testing rules. There's federal rules on that Go Carry has to comply with and MV has to comply with. The vehicles that Go Carry provides for its door-to-door service for persons with disabilities are the smaller vehicles as well.
So they're the same, so Carrie would be also managing the van, or would the town of Morrisville, I understand that Go Carry is the microtransit and we don't own them and they don't own them and all that kind of stuff, but the vans, is that the same scenario? Is it also Go Carry, that they're vans, or how?
Well, that's a question for the council later, and when we get to the end, that's our vendor now. They can do it and they will do it, but is that the direction we want to go?
Okay, that's interesting. I was just assuming status quo with the oversight and management, but I see where you're going with that. One thing that we have as a benefit with the microtransit is also having the capability of transporting bicycles. With the vans, will that capability still be available?
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for that, but I can I can find out.
Okay, I think that's gonna be a key question of some of our constituents.
Bicycle rack on the vans.
Yeah.
If they do have the capability, it's not going to be the same type of capability as the LTVs. They just can't. The the bicycle rack,
Correct,
but
but, some people, I mean, Morrisville is only so many square miles, and people that wanna travel end to end might wanna bike, you know, from one point to another, and to have the ability to also, transport the bike would be a value, I believe, so.
yeah, no, that's a good question. You
Okay,
stumped me.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Kessler.
So I would like to echo Councilmember Johnson's point about taking advantage of the funding, as well as Councilmember Patel and Scroggins Johnson about having that demographic data. And then also with the bicycle rack on the vans, that's very important. I have seen, I put a bicycle rack on the back, I think. Most people, they have just one of those ones that slides into the trailer hitch, whatnot. So in terms of success, having just 3 people on a typical fixed route bus is success. You're removing 3 cars off the roadway, improving traffic. I would definitely rather have 2 to 3 people on a minivan than 1 to 2 on the half buses, the shuttles. And obviously the more people that we can get on, the better. I am curious about the capacity of the minivan. How many people would be able to fit on there?
I think with that, it's 5 or 6.
Yeah.
5, 6 range.
So,
But I'll look into that too to get more specificity.
so echoing Mayor Pro Tem Rabati's point, you know, when we reach capacity, what do we do? And then assuming that we're transitioning to the minivans, I would just want to assure individually that, you know, degrading driver pay, safety standards, or job security too much. I'm assuming that Go Carry will be hiring drivers, and I want to make sure that our, you know, they're treated well. With transit propensity, does a higher propensity mean quicker and or easier implementation of a fixed route service?
No, it means the likelihood of your service being productive with high utilization per trip being higher.
But it does not translate into a quicker implementation of that.
No.
It's more demand without a funding mechanism or anything to meet the supply.
Right.
If we do go with the advanced booking option, I would like to see the routes that get generated. Ideally, you know, map, color gradient, or line thickness. Main thing there is if there's a trend that we're seeing that could potentially inform a fixed route. And this is more of a question for the ether, but I would like to know a date to start implementation of fixed route, and what we can do between now and that point to make that make sense, make fixed route make sense, and to implement it quicker. And I think that's it.
And I do want to mention there's still some content to cover after this. I just wanted to pause and give the council an opportunity to ask questions or provide some discussion before we get back into it. Mayor Pro Tem Rabati.
Just TJ Satish, did you
Oh.
have anything to add?
Yeah, you were first, go. Thank you. I'll start at the end with Councilmember Kessling was talking about fixed route in the future. I'm interested in a fixed route in addition to the node. I think a fixed route will take a lot of people, and then having also the node will give us our geographic. So that's going to be more extensive, but I think that's where I would like to see us get to eventually. You talked early in the presentation about doing things piecemeal and adding one more to the early and late and leaving the middle with just two. I'd like to add one to the front, the back, and add a third to the middle. I don't see any reason to underserve that portion that needs the most, just to ratchet slower. I'd like to ratchet both of those at the same time. So add one more vehicle to the whole day. So I'll have 2, 3, and 2.
Yeah, that's what the full implementation would be. It's just,
I'm not sure why we'd want to wait
okay,
for full
okay.
implementation, because that's when people want reliability. So if we're not able to provide that when it matters to them, I'm not sure what measuring the beginning and the end is going to help. So it's going to cost more, but unless there's real logistic problems with doing that, I think that makes more sense to make that happen. I'm much in favor of switching to minivans from the large transit vehicles that we're not really fully utilizing now. And I think that's where we had consensus before. So I think we can probably move forward on that, hopefully, as a starting point. I would really love to just do an update to the app and say, in order to keep using it, we need your age, anonymize it as much as you need to have the trust of everybody. You should have age and other things that are going to be helpful to us. And I think a separate discussion is Title VI and whether or not implementing that for the town, the pros and cons and things like that. But I think taking certain steps that will give us more demographic information can only help us make better decisions going forward. And I think a lot of you already touched on that. And that's what I've got for right now. Thank you.
Just want to make sure. So I had a hard time making out some of your comments at the beginning. You mentioned looking at establishing fixed route by connecting the nodes. Is that?
I believe that data will show that there's a certain route that sort of makes sense as a fixed route because of the use of the nodes.
Yeah,
So
right.
that would be the informed fixed route. And I don't think it's going to be every quarter mile. I think it'll be connecting those nodes, adding a couple more, so it's not going to be a real fixed route. And then we want to continue the nodes, which people are starting to use more. So that'll give us more capacity to serve the nodes because people will have the reliable fixed route that's taking a lot of the rides right now. So they'll rely on that, and then they'll open up the rest.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So one of the fixed routes that we drew up is very, very, like what informed it was the line route, the neighborhood line route, was the activity at existing nodes. That was a big factor in kind of where we looked at where to draw up fixed routes. I'll get into this in future content, but it's going to be really, really hard to get funding for a fixed route that doesn't have that access every quarter to a third of a mile. That's a service standard that's been adopted by the boards that govern Wake Transit, that the Wake Transit program adheres to.
That makes sense. We're a unique community, so.
I mean, it's possible a case could be made, but right now, like if we walked in right now and we wanted to do that, the answer would be a big no. I mean, I just don't know how else to.
Like along 54, that's a main road that doesn't have businesses on it, so it doesn't make sense.
The problem with that, I'm going to get into the content. The problem with that is if you're going to do fixed route, you have to offer a premium access along the route. You can't just have a node here, access point here. You know, like you have to, in order to, you're not going to get the minimum ridership that's needed, the minimum productivity that's needed with that low density of access.
And that's federal funding?
What's that?
It's federal funding that you're talking about, or local funding?
That's the CFAP, but I mean, if the town wanted to do this, if the town was going to pay for everything, you could do whatever you want, as long as you don't violate ADA and Title VI, pretty much. It's just, if you want to use somebody else's money, they're not going to be willing to give you that money if we're not going to adhere to certain standards because they know better. I mean, that's part of it. But I mean, but I mean, it's hard for me. I was actually involved in the development of that back when I was at Campo as the Wake Transit Program Manager. It's all for very good reason. It's to invest in the things that rise to the top as being a demonstrated need through a legitimate planning process. Um, and you know, we can't just off the wall. There's certain transit planning principles and concepts that drive the decisions that need to be made about service models based on productivity. Like how do you get to a certain level of productivity? You have to fixed route. You have to justify a certain level of, you know, in order to do it, you have to have a certain level of promised productivity or potential productivity. But you're not going to get to that productivity if you don't provide enough access. That's one kind of concept that dovetails with or relates to kind of where you were going. It's just there's a lot of that I think might not be completely understood that I want to get into with future content here. So
Thank you.
Brett, my question, I was not able to hear a lot of, because the echo is different. You know, one of the questions I have is like, which has been put, replace the buses to vans, right? So is it like add more vans, like say 2 vans for 1 bus kind of a thing, or like 1-to-1 replacement? The reason I'm just thinking logically is it's not the van or the bus, it's the driver who is more expensive. So if you put vans, so the van needs 2 drivers, and that raises the cost and what we are trying to achieve. So I it doesn't matter either of the things because the cost there is pretty low compared to it. But my main question is 30 minutes. It's not going to work. I will not take it, period. You know, I don't, you know, personally, why would I wait 30 minutes when it's only 9 square miles?
yeah, we really want to be in the 10 to you where you want to be for most is within 10 to 15.
Exactly.
And certainly you kind of set your standard at 20 as like you don't want to go over that. That's where you want to be.
And what is the real reason behind it? It's, I understand it might be, is, forget about just 1 van or 2 vans, like even if it is 1 van, is it the distance or is it the traffic that's causing the delay, which ideally, like from point A to point B is 5 minutes? So I need the backside data to see what is the real issue for a person to wait 30 minutes.
One vehicle being in service in a 9 square mile area. That's if I've seen a lot of the data, I've seen that right there that's the main reason. That's the culprit.
And like just going cross town for single ride here and there, so the time wasted between.
Yeah, because you know, a vehicle, say somebody gets a vehicle, they want to get picked up at Kitts Creek and go to Park West. And you know, certainly there's a lot of nodes in between where a shared ride opportunity is available and they can do that. But
Do they get that? How do they really add? Because that algorithm I never understood too. Because take your example, Kitts Creek to Park West, you have say 3 nodes in the middle. Are they kids? It's on the way. They're stopping, picking them up.
yeah, should be.
Or is it first in, first out? Like, you know, that's not getting into the system. And the guy picks up a passenger in Kitts Creek, driving towards Park West. Will he get a notification that there's a person here, I need to stop?
Yeah, if somebody like on the way, if it's still feasible and they're not going to overrun it, if another request comes in on the way for them to pick somebody up at that node, they would be signaled to pick somebody up at that node.
Are they technically taking it, or they are missing it? That's because we don't have the data either. So-
I mean, we have the data that we get.
Yeah, but
And
that,
what
but if the
happens?
guy is not picking up, like, oh, it's two lights back. Okay, let me go get back. So that's the reason I'm asking. The 30 minutes is just not acceptable. I'm not saying how. Like my idea is how to make it faster, um, but adding more bus, I get that concept. But what is the gap that's causing the 30 minutes? Is it like cross things or?
I mean, it's just there's just where the vehicle is. Taking somebody to drop off, like maybe somebody's at HSNC, and there's a trip going from Kitts Creek to Park West. It's not feasible to go and pick somebody up at that node. That's quite an inconvenience in travel time for the trip that you're already taking. So you got to finish the trip at Park West before then you go and pick up that other trip, and that's wait time. With another vehicle, there's more likelihood that it would be available to hit that trip sooner.
That's good, thank you.
I just have one more question.
Sorry.
So I think that it would be a good idea, we don't have to do it now, but I think it would be a good idea for us to have a discussion about prioritizing exactly what our, like Vicky said, what does success look like for the shuttle? Because like, if success is people that currently don't have mobility options now have them, then that's one thing, right? If success is cars off the road, that's another thing. And I think we have to, we may not be always able to do both, because in some cases, they're just, we need to do opposite things. So I think that if we need to decide as a council which one of those things is the priority. They're both really important. But if we don't decide which one is the priority, we're going to keep going around and around in these discussions, trying to get both, and we can't. So I just think that's a discussion we should have.
When the Smart Shuttle was originally launched, the goal was not to get cars off the road. The goal was not to serve work commuters. It was to expand mobility options for a wide swath of people who otherwise may not have as many options. And that's what I understand. If you're going to do microtransit the way that the town has done it, that checks out. I mean, if the idea is to serve work commuters or something like that, then the town would have done something different. So, that's what I always understand the goal to be, but it's always good for the council to come back around to, this is why, this is what we're trying to do. This is the objectives that we're trying to achieve with this service. There are measures of success attached to the community funding area program. There are measures of success, which are just based on productivity and cost per passenger, which is agnostic to who you're serving, right? But certainly the town can add on to that. If we want to make sure that we're retaining our funding and all that, then we have to hit those measures, or targets. But the town can add on to that and track, like, how are we doing with respect to this measure or this measure, that get at those more specific objectives about who we're trying to serve and for what purposes. So.
I just have one more question. Just to follow up on Councilmember Goodeno's question was about the cost difference between minivans and bus. What is the difference, including drivers?
So the difference with Go Carry through FY28 is $3. I was going to talk about this in future content, but I will go ahead and address it now, and then when we get to it, then we can just kind of breeze through. But so the contract that Go Carry has right now with MV is the difference between the light transit vehicles and the operation thereof and the minivans built into the contract would just be $3. That doesn't reflect the actual cost to MV. That's just the contracted rate for those things. Where you get cost savings in general with a minivan versus a light transit vehicle is, you remember I mentioned that part of the hourly rate that we're paying is the capital depreciation cost for the vehicles. Well, minivans are a whole lot less expensive than the light transit vehicles. However, they do have to be replaced more often because their useful life is shorter, but that doesn't make up for the difference in cost, even when you factor in that. So that's really where most of the cost savings comes. Now, Go Carry with their contract has indicated that they want to do microtransit. One of the reasons they haven't done microtransit, they did a study for it, a western zone and a southern zone in the town of Cary a few years ago. But the reason they didn't do it is because of that. They haven't launched it. It's because of that contracted rate right now. But they feel like they can renegotiate their contract with MV that starting in FY29, that they can get a much lower rate than just that $3. And that's why I brought up the issue of, do you want to look at another vendor? Because if you go with another vendor, you can go ahead, we could take advantage of that much lower rate more immediately and do more vans than possibly just 2 and 3.
Can I suggest we're getting into a lot of content that's in the second part of the presentation? So I don't know if council wants to take a small break or not. It's 7:30. I think we had a total of 3 hours slated for this, but that's up to you. But yeah, we are starting to get into a lot of territory that is covered later.
Sounds good. Is 10 minutes enough for everybody, or do you need 15? 10 minutes? Okay, please reconvene at 7:37. Thank you.
I will breeze through some of what's to come because
Planner Martin.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me now? Okay, yes. All right, so thank you for that. That was a really good discussion. We're going to breeze through some of this because we already sort of hit on it, and I'm going to go fast in some cases so we stay on time. But we're getting ready to get into the factors and feasibility constraints influencing the direction of the study. And we'll start with peer reviews and the takeaways from that. The study carried out a number of peer reviews of other communities that have made transit service model changes. And this is really the takeaways from that. As more people take advantage of highly time and space flexible microtransit service, increasing ridership can lead to deteriorating reliability. Really? That's what we're experiencing in Morrisville right now, so that verifies. It's important to have connections to regional routes and cost efficiency when contemplating both microtransit solutions and fixed routes. So you need to look at your connections to regional routes and those transfer hubs that are close by as kind of the anchors of your fixed route, or anchors sort of your microtransit system. We do that now with our microtransit system. Growing suburban communities have a need for flexible strategies that address evolving operational realities and community needs. And while microtransit provides flexibility and accessibility, it encounters challenges with demand uncertainty and cost management. And I do want to note that there were several cases of systems that transitioned completely from fixed route to microtransit because the geographic coverage is very limited with fixed route, as I mentioned earlier. It's only suitable for and productive for serving more highly traveled corridors where origins and destinations are more closely clustered. And microtransit expands that geographic coverage, provides more flexibility for when trips may be taken, and provides more direct and less time-consuming travel from origin to destination. You remember with the service that, or the performance of the Smart Shuttle, the travel times once you get on the shuttle are actually pretty good and competitive. I do want to mention real quick that locally, while Wake Forest was not one of the peers that we looked at, that is a local peer that we can look at that transitioned from fixed route to microtransit. And Apex did implement fixed route, and their fixed route has not really been that productive. All right, so just going back to the May 2025 engagement, the first phase of engagement in the spring, you have a lot of information on the results of that in your additional supplemental information packets. But I'm just going to focus on the key takeaways to review that real quickly. So the map results, we did a lot of mapping, kind of place where you want to have access or where you want to go, exercises with that. And it places the highest demand for transit access along in the NC 54 corridor and west. So providing access to shopping, again, a lot of the residential areas in western Morrisville, and work as a top priority. We did ask about favorability versus unfavorability of the Smart Shuttle. 60% have a favorable view compared to 19% who have an unfavorable view. 19% is high for people to say it's unfavorable. That's whenever you survey people and 19% say it's unfavorable, that's actually pretty high. So, but that's not awful. Survey respondents who use it typically use the service several times a week. So they're consistent users. They noted wait times, operational hours in the service area are the top concerns between current and former users. When we asked about who used to use it but don't use it anymore and why they don't use it anymore, that's what came up and popped as the reason or reasons. And in selecting the use of a new service, their top priorities are frequency, reliability, convenience, and affordability. All right, so as I mentioned, we came to the town council back in the summer. It was in June last year. And some of the takeaways to summarize from that were, we got kind of what your priorities were, to prioritize local travel over commuter trips and focus on seniors, non-drivers, and people with disabilities. So we did get some direction from the council in June about who we need to serve, who we need to focus on serving. Also, we talked about service models and where you want us to look. And so there really wasn't much differentiation that came out of that. You kind of left all the options open, but to further evaluate deviated fixed route, Smart Shuttle expansion, or a hybrid model. You wanted us to look at lowering the Smart Shuttle cost because at the time we were showing that we were doing about $35 per passenger, which is the full cost. That's not the cost to the town, but that's the full cost. And then the key service goals that we need to look at are frequency or service wait times, cost, reliability, and convenience. Okay. We also reached out to stakeholders back in the summer and the fall of 2025, and here were the takeaways from our coordination with them. The key themes that were expressed were mobility options covering the breadth of community needs, senior students, and commuters. So again, not focusing on like this specific group of people that are traveling en masse at specific times. Desire for reliable, accessible, and regionally connected transit. They were really interested in the idea of advanced booking to improve service access, expanding and densifying the transit nodes. As I mentioned, we have pretty low node density or passenger access density for a 9 square mile area. To keep pace with job access and new housing, and GoCarry as probably our closest stakeholder that we do business with and does a lot of transit service planning. They did suggest enhancing our existing microtransit service rather than shifting to fixed route. More vehicles and nodes to improve reliability and access, and then exploring that advanced booking option for either node or door-to-door access for seniors and persons with disabilities. All right, so let's talk about the Wake Transit Community Funding Area Program and compliance with federal law. These are some major feasibility constraints that we have to work within. All right, so the Community Funding Area Program in Wake Transit, it's primarily financed by the 0.5% sales tax for public transportation expansion within the county, approved by voters back in 2016. It is this funding source, the Community Funding Area Program funding source, is available to municipalities outside of Raleigh and Cary to implement local transit services or to make improvements that enhance existing or planned regional services. There's actually 12 eligible parties for that funding. The 10 municipalities, the Research Triangle Foundation, and Wake County. It's awarded through a competitive process with limited funds. There's about $6 million available per year for the program. The program previously required, and we took it, Morrisville was actually the first entity to take advantage of the program, to get funded through the program. But it was a 50% local match for operating capital or planning expenses. That is transitioning in FY27 to 65% from the Community Funding Area Program, with a 35% required local share. One thing I want to mention, though, is we did get a bus infrastructure or node infrastructure funding allocation back in fiscal year 2021 through the Wake Transit Program that the town already used to build the nodes, to put the infrastructure at the nodes. But there was about $100,000, a little over $100,000 left over of that was encumbered at the time, that is available to us at a 50% match through the end of calendar year 2027 as a result of an extension that we got to that original capital funding agreement that was executed back in FY21. So that's still 50%, but everything else, any new application, any modifications, that would be 65%. All right, so the Community Funding Area Program, some more important points. It's governed by a program management plan that is adopted by the Wake Transit Governing Boards, the Campo Executive Board and Go Triangle Board of Trustees. It sets policy for eligibility, application for funds, the scoring of application and prioritization of projects. It provides project oversight, so rules, and performance standards. The annual funding for any single applicant is capped at 30%, which of that $6 million is roughly $1.8 million of the total amount made available. So we really can't ask for more than that in a single year. And that's for everything, operating capital, planning, whatever. The scoring is focused on connections to existing fixed routes and major activity centers. So again, you have to think about the lens that they're looking through is what you're doing. Are you using existing opportunities for transit connections like transfer hubs, the Regional Transit Center, Park West Village? Are you using those as the anchors for any service that you're designing? And we are for the Smart Shuttle. Those are very, very significant anchors for the system. Population and employment density plays a role, serving populations with the greatest need. So again, it goes back to some of that transit propensity. Who has the highest likelihood to rely on transit or to use transit? Cost efficiency is part of it, planning, justification, and project readiness, adherence to best practices, and local match. And under the program, it is easier and far more fruitful to expand on an established service model than to pursue funding for a new service model and fixed route proposals are more difficult to fund. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, in a suburban area, actually Morrisville has a pretty high density, as like I said, as Wake and Durham counties go. So it probably has, depending on if you just use that as kind of a gauge, it's probably has higher propensity for fixed routes than a lot of other suburbs of Raleigh or other CFA eligible municipalities throughout the county. As I mentioned, one thing that brings us down a little bit though is there's not a very strong internal commuting market again. So that really brings down the promise of that high utilization per trip. Being able, moving people in mass that are going to the same places or traveling along the same corridors. Another thing is the reason it's more fruitful to expand on an established service model is because remember, the town got money through the community funding area program to build infrastructure for a node-based microtransit system. The Wake Transit program is starting to pay a lot more attention to, well, what's the useful life of all of those capital improvements that we gave you, and why are you so ready to move on to something else? Was that a good investment for the program if you knew you were going to move on to something else or you wanted to go on to something else so quickly? So that's one thing to keep in mind, this idea of decommissioning prior investments that have been made before by the program. You must show a promise for meeting established service standards for passengers per revenue hour and operating cost per passenger. For fixed route, you're looking at a minimum of 6 passengers per revenue hour. Under that program, typically the standard, kind of the National Transit Planning Convention standard and Service Monitoring Convention is 10 passengers per revenue hour. But for the community funding area program, it's a little bit relaxed at 6. But that is higher for fixed route than it is for demand response or microtransit, which is 3, which we have consistently beat for year after year with the Smart Shuttle. Fixed route services must conform to specified design guidelines regarding route alignment, direct path with no or minimal deviation, stop spacing. So Mayor Colley, this gets at kind of what we were talking about earlier. Service span, frequency, stop infrastructure, and service quality and effectiveness. All right, let's talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act and its applicability to transit. So both federal law and the Wake Transit program require compliance with this. Nodes and stops must be ADA compliant, which means that they have to have a clear and level path of minimum width from the nearest sidewalk or pedestrian facility to a level paved boarding pad. Our nodes are ADA compliant. If a sidewalk doesn't exist to a site, to the side of a node or stop, a sidewalk must be constructed from the nearest intersection or already constructed sidewalk. So you can imagine, depending on how you're trying to place your stops or nodes, it could require a lot of extra work and cost. Fixed route requires passenger access roughly every quarter of a mile, as I mentioned earlier, with all of those points required to be ADA compliant. The vehicles need to be equipped to board and transport persons with mobility impairments. Must be available to those persons. An equivalent opportunity to use the service must be provided. So really what this means is that equivalent service, particularly for fixed route, is if persons with disabilities within 3/4 of a mile of the stop are unable to access the stop, which in a lot of cases they won't be because 3/4 of a mile is a long, long way, and there's a lot of places where there's sidewalk gaps and so forth, complimentary curb-to-curb service must be provided to those persons. So this requires for fixed route a separate complimentary ADA paratransit service within 3/4 of a mile of the route. We do not have a choice. It is absolutely required. We could be prosecuted by the Department of Justice if we don't do this. All right, so applicability to transit a little bit more. Just this map shows a hypothetical view of ADA paratransit service area for the fixed route services that were drawn up for the 2019 study, just as a hypothetical example. The dashed line that you see in the map to the right depicts the ADA paratransit zone for the fixed routes evaluated in that study. And you see that encompasses many areas outside of the town and other municipalities that must be served and for which the town must absorb the cost. Again, we do not have a choice. Now I don't want to get into the weeds here, but there's overlapping ADA service areas with other providers that things are worked out and so forth, but generally you have to assume that you have to absorb it. The ADA complimentary paratransit service typically costs about 10 to 20% more 10 to 20% of the fixed route cost in addition to the cost of the fixed route. That's generally how it runs. In Raleigh, I think they're pushing 25%, but that's a place where they have very entrenched ADA service and transit service for many, many decades, and an ADA market has been established and moved on for a long time. ADA complementary paratransit service also requires additional staff time to carry out the administration of a plan, an ADA plan, which requires or includes eligibility determinations, appeals, trip booking and scheduling, and so forth. So there's also an added, labor effort that has to be accounted for with that as well. And the service involves high demand and cost management uncertainty. It's also something that it's not one of those things that snowballs out of control quickly, but it does snowball over time, again, as a market for it becomes entrenched. All right, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and its applicability to transit. So both federal law and the Wake Transit Program require compliance with this. It prohibits discrimination based on race, color, or national origin, ensuring equal access and benefits for all individuals. I think I'll just stop here real quick and say the best way to think about Title VI, and a lot of people I think get it wrong, is they think of it in terms of, well, we have to provide access to this group of people or this group of people or this group of people, and kind of focusing on specific populations. And that's not really what this is getting at. What it's really getting at is everything should be performance driven so that you don't discriminate, right? So, and you'll see what I'm talking about here in a minute. And also a lot of this comes out of this, what's called the concept of disparate impacts, where a policy or a program is facially neutral, like on its face, it's not discriminating, but the actual implementation effects of it result in a discriminatory pattern. And Frank's over there, he's the attorney. I will say the U.S. Department of Justice did issue a final rule, I'll do air quotes for this, that they were discarding disparate impacts from Title VI compliance. The problem with that, though, is it did not go through the notice and comment process, which is required of federal rulemaking. So, in my opinion, it could very easily be struck down as, nice try, but no. But the idea of Title VI, if you believe in it, if you think it's a good thing, then we want to stick to disparate impacts. And a lot of the federal guidance in other departments that are still out there still are saying this is what we need to do. So anyway, just to get into this a little bit, it's really data and performance-driven justification and decision-making for service investment. So it could be for the siting of passenger access infrastructure and associated amenities. Where you put bus stops or nodes and what you put at those nodes should be driven by traffic at those nodes. Performance-based. Use of vehicles of different age and condition across the system rather than on specific routes. You want to mix, if you have vehicles of different age and different condition, you want to mix them up so that you're not putting an old bus with bad air conditioning on the same route every day and then this really nice one over here on another route. That's not good. System-wide service standards for things like vehicle load, service frequency, on-time performance, and service availability. And so the service availability meaning the geographic distribution of routes. And then the focus is not on making, really kind of the standard, at least that the Federal Transit Administration uses when they do Title VI analysis of transit systems, is a focus on not making existing service worse with respect to impacts. So I just want to point out, this will help you understand a little bit about what this is getting at. So I put together this Title VI red flags slide. So these would be Title VI red flags as they relate to public transportation. Fewer amenities at stops or nodes with higher ridership than at those with lower ridership. Greater distance between stops on a part of a route with higher population density than on one with lower population density. A 20-year-old vehicle consistently being used to provide service on the same route every day, and a 5-year-old vehicle being used every day on another. Routes that deviate from a direct path that would otherwise more efficiently connect proximately spaced stops such that those who would otherwise travel the direct path are inconvenienced. routes that deviate from a direct path to provide premium proximity to some residential areas but not others, or a service change that eliminates passenger access at locations with higher concentrations of Title VI populations with no performance-driven justification. Now, the map that you see is a route that we drew up following up from your last meeting, our last touch point in November, that would alter that circulator service to provide direct access to Kids Creek and Breckenridge. Those are Title VI red flags. That's part of the reason why you haven't seen that before. But we'll talk about that. I'm showing more about that here a little bit later. All right, so do we have any pressing questions at this point before we move on? Okay. Part 3. So this is our service delivery model development evaluation results and recommendations. All right, so this is actually one of my favorite slides that I put together for this. The feasibility factors impacting service concept development. So this is all that played into what we had to, the constraints, what we had to work with to look at different alternatives for service improvement or the future of public transportation in the town of Morrisville. There's the community funding area program support. Again, the questions that will be asked, the major questions that will be asked: how much will the program financially tolerate from one applicant? The level of scrutiny for program to fund the service improvements, the ease of application to move forward expeditiously and for the program to support improvements, and how well will the service design meet or improve against established standards and guidelines. Then we have our town budget considerations. How much can the town afford and how much is it willing to spend? What can we assume for revenues to support improvements and how much is the town getting for its investment? There's the regulatory compliance considerations. What ADA service responsibilities are required for each service model? What level of effort is required for those responsibilities? How much do those ADA service responsibilities cost? And what Title VI requirements must be considered and how would they impact service design? And then there's the idea of planning justification for the concepts. The density of access and geographic coverage of service, reliability, directness of travel, frequency, wait times, service productivity, matching service to demand in accord with transit planning and operations principles, and then the results of our public and stakeholder engagement. We really want to make sure we're responding to the feedback we got from the public and our stakeholders, as well as the council. So our concepts that were developed, all of these things played into and kind of established guardrails for us. So just to go through the alternatives again, you've seen these, so I feel like I can go through these pretty quickly. The first alternative that we looked at is just increasing the vehicles, but keeping the nodes the same, not expanding the nodes. We know that that's probably the lowest hanging fruit need. Increase the vehicles without expanding the nodes. This may entail slightly shorter wait times and travel times and slightly better ride booking availability than an expanded service option with additional nodes. Keep in mind the relationship here. If you expand the nodes with the existing service level that we have today, you are making things worse because you're making access easier for people and you're setting up the opportunity for there to be more trip patterns that take away, and so that's just going to eat into the reliability. So you really don't want to expand nodes without expanding service. But a case could be made for expanding service without even expanding the nodes based on the performance that we have going on today that we shared with you earlier. The downside to this is we do have low node density throughout the town, and that was indicated by the results of our engagement. That was one of the top things mentioned: expand service area, provide better access. So there would be access to fewer pickup and drop-off locations. You see the effective service area, which is really just taking within a quarter of a mile of each node and adding that up. What's the total square mileage? You see the cost per hour. That market rate gets at the minivan rate. That is what we have identified as if we were to secure another vendor to provide the service. On average, we would be paying $85 an hour rather than $121 an hour with minivans for Go Carry. And again, I want to stress that could change beginning in FY 2029. So there's there's a little bit of something, it's a trade-off to think about there. But you see the yearly operating budget estimate there, and there's a lot of notes under the table on it. So I'll go through the rest of these quickly. There's the expanded nodes and increased vehicles. You expand the nodes, you increase the effective service area quite a bit. We looked at, and the report looked at up to 27 total nodes, so that would be 9 additional. You see the cost per hour, the general range that we're dealing with there. And the capital cost would be roughly between $180,000 and $225,000 for those additional nodes. Okay. And there's some more information here about the expanded nodes and increased vehicles. What was the criteria for the potential node expansion? We didn't just dream these up out of nowhere. They were informed by things, including the spring survey that provided the desired destinations and where people want to go. Employment access. 2 nodes were added to improve access to employment centers, particularly in areas with concentrations of hospitality and retail jobs. And so really that was focusing on the Airport Boulevard I-40 interchange area, where there's a conglomeration of service sector jobs in that location. Also, there's nodes that were placed adjacent to Town Hall. There was, a lot of people with the future town center coming. I know there's one down at the library, but there's going to be more activity, and having more nodes close to town center might be appropriate. Strategic, also nodes at Wegmans and Food Lion on Davis Drive. I know Wegmans is technically in the town of Cary, but people really want to go there, and so it popped as something that we identified. Anyway, you have them listed there where they were identified based on all of that input, and then also just what locations have a promise for actual pretty good ridership or traffic for boardings and alightings. Okay, so to the fixed route, moving on to that, we looked at 2 options, 2 concepts. What we called a neighborhood loop, and then also a neighborhood line. So I'll start with the neighborhood loop. This focuses on the core of Morrisville with greater access to recreation and community destinations, but a more limited focus on interagency and regional transit connections. So this already is sort of problematic because it's not really connecting up to the regional transit center. However, it is connecting to a place where people can transfer to Go Triangle services at Wake Tech on Route 310. But that's not as good as getting to the actual transit center where you can connect to any route in the region. But anyway, so that's really kind of what that's getting at. And then it's also not providing as direct travel north-south between the 2 transit center anchors or the 2 anchors of where you would provide that premium access to be able to transfer to other services. It travels in a loop with stops on either side of the street for service in both directions. The frequency of service, there is absolutely no way if we do fixed route that we would ever get away with going from the microtransit service that we have to hourly service. It would have to be 30-minute service. You're actually, if you go from a service where the average wait time is right around that, a little bit over 30 minutes, to a fixed route service that's just hourly, that is not an improvement. That would not be any type of improvement. It would be taking a step back. So we pretty much had to assume a frequency of service of 30 minutes. You see how many vehicles that requires. How you get the number of vehicles that's required is based on a cycle time that has to be calculated for the route. That's based on a number of other assumptions like speed, like what can we assume as the speed and all that. So just so you know a little bit of background on that. The cost per hour for this, and this is all in FY $26, is $124 per hour using the light transit vehicles that we're using now. You see the yearly operating budget for that and the capital costs. When you deal with fixed route, you are making, if you do fixed route, you are making a commitment to spend a lot of money on capital because it is much more capital intensive. So the range there, and you see that's a wide range. but that's because there's variations in what you might do for stop amenities. But minimally, you have to have that concrete pad that provides level boarding access that's connected to sidewalk to the curb. And that costs money on its own, a decent amount. So one of the things I want to mention too is yeah, I'll get into the community funding area impact in a moment in terms of cost, but this is all the total cost. There's also the neighborhood line fixed route. If you were to ask me which of the fixed routes is the most lucrative, it would be this one. And I also want to mention the public said the same thing. The public, when we asked the public about between the two fixed routes, this was the one, not by a huge margin, but this is the one with the greatest preference. Focuses on cross-town service with access to key shopping, recreation, and community destinations, and more direct access to those anchors that I mentioned, the interagency regional transit connections. It travels in a more direct traditional line with stops on either side of the street. This takes the form of what you would expect for fixed route. To connect, it travels a highly traveled corridor. It connects proximately spaced trip origins and destinations, and that's it. And it provides pretty good directness of travel. So your travel time is not bad. It's pretty good on this. So this would be, this is kind of like if you were to say we're sticking to the principles of fixed route of what we drew up, this would be it. And you see the costs here associated with that. We did look at other, I think Councilmember Fender was asking a lot of questions about what did we look at that we didn't put in the report. And we'll talk about what we want to put in the report in a bit. We did look at a whole lot of other potential options for a fixed route that didn't make the cut. And you see the combination of them here, one even going to RDU. And that's mainly because of public input that we received and even some stakeholder input. But we looked at those to evaluate whether or not we should carry them forward for consideration of future implementation. And the reasons for their elimination were limited service coverage, poor reliability. Again, longer routes are less reliable. If you have the longer you make the route, because there's more things that can go wrong with a vehicle that's scheduled to be on it on part of the cycle. Excessive travel time, duplication of existing routes. Remember, we do have fixed route service in Morrisville on the east side of town go trying to Route 310, and low ridership potential. Also, the concepts ultimately do not comport with the community funding area program, ADA Title VI. Well, some of these didn't either, but other concepts that do not comport with that, we tried not to develop them for consideration because, again, this was commissioned as a feasibility study, and we're working within those feasibility constraints that I laid out for Title VI, ADA, community funding area program, the standards, fixed route suitability, transit planning principles, that sort of thing. So you don't see anything that we originally looked at that connects Kitts Creek or Breckenridge. Okay, so just want to take a quick look at the fall survey results again and what we took away from that. 65% of respondents favored expanding the service area, even if there is a modest decline in reliability or increased time. So that's telling you that people actually value access a little bit more than the wait time if they're given the choice. 57% of respondents favored some sort of advanced booking option for improved reliability. However, there was kind of a really strong opposite reaction. 43% did not support an advanced booking option ahead of real-time booking, which may impact that real-time booking availability and wait times. Respondents also favored having additional microtransit vehicles in service to improve booking and wait times. There was a slight preference for a node-based microtransit, the improvements to the microtransit versus the fixed route, but not overwhelmingly, 54% to 46%, based on the greater geographic reach of the service area and more direct transit patterns, so more directness of travel. There was a slight preference more for the linear fixed route versus the circulator, again, 54% to 46%. Okay, so I want to follow up on the latest council feedback that we got on this on some of it that we got on this back in November. This is a hypothetical fixed route concept developed based on council feedback, and this is what I'm calling Route A. I have a lot of statistics. Here we go. So this would provide access to Kitts Creek and Breckenridge more directly. Breckenridge also, with the other circulator, it wouldn't really provide access to Breckenridge, but it would be proximal. But yeah, Kitts Creek with the other service concepts is not being served. And I do want to be very clear, yes, Kitts Creek has pretty good ridership on the smart shuttle, on the node-based smart shuttle. Breckenridge actually doesn't, but Kitts Creek, it's not the highest, but it's pretty good, healthy ridership. But there are feasibility issues with this. It's a 2.4 million, with this type of route, particularly making those kind of deviations again, every time you draw a line on a map and it's going some amount of distance, that's just extra money. And there's a lot of dead area, and like really, really dead area that isn't really lucrative to serve on this route between Kitts Creek and then when you would get back down into Morrisville around Breckenridge. And that's area that would cost money where it's not being productive. But it's a $2.4 million annual operating expense. It's roughly $3 million capital cost for the access infrastructure. It would involve a very expansive ADA service area, which again would be additional ongoing operating expense. It is circuitous routing, which would degrade the travel time for most passengers to make those deviations. It would result in overall low ridership and productivity as a result of that. Again, there are some Title VI red flags here. Premium access to some residential areas, but not others. It deviates from a direct path that would otherwise more efficiently connect proximally spaced stops, such that those who would otherwise travel the direct path are inconvenienced. It does not meet fixed route service design guidelines, so it has a very low likelihood of support from the community funding area program. One of the things to note here is it doesn't even connect to the existing regional transit center, so we did do that. We need to do that if we're going to do fixed route. But that costs more. And again, what's leading to this, particularly with Kitts Creek, is you can only get over there on Hobson or McCrimmon. And so it's just really, really difficult to make that connection. So again, feasibility issues, $2.9 million operating expense, $3.5 to $4 million capital cost, very expensive. Same thing that we just talked about with the other route. It's just the numbers are a little different, they're a bit higher. Okay, so if you were to tell me, Brett, we want to do fixed route as soon as possible. This is the earliest hypothetical feasible timeline for fixed route implementation. In January, of 2027, we'd have to wait till 2027 for our community funding area application because we're changing the scope of the project that we already have funded. And when you do that, you have to go back through the entire cycle. You cannot make an amendment. So we would have to wait until January of 2027 to submit the new scope of work. That would require reapplication. It'd have to go back through the annual community funding area project selection and funding cycle, which would be also taking a chance because it's competing with others. And what we would do is, because we have to do the capital first, we would not yet, of course, we would want to get the future programming of our operating in place, but we would really first be applying for the capital because we have to get that in place and then coming back for the operating later. Then we would get, through the FY28 budget cycle for the Wake Transit program, the authorization of funding from that if we're awarded. Then really kind of starting in the summer there, of 2027, we would do our service refinement planning. So we'd go through a planning process to refine the alignment, the operating plan, stop infrastructure locations and specifications. That's really a 9-month process. because what you see that we've done, and as far as the study is going to take you, is the concept. But we have to nail everything down that makes the fixed route tick and makes it work. And that takes time. And we have to come back to you and at various points throughout that process and be like, is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? So anyway, that would set us up then for a community funding area application. Well, not quite, but we would make the community funding area application in January of 2028 for the operating expenses. Again, so like I mentioned the capital, we have to work on that first. Then we come in for the operating expenses. And from April to December of 2028, we would be working on the stop infrastructure to support the refined alignment during that time. So building the stops, at least the concrete pads, that's where we would start. And then of course for the operations, then we would have to look at, would we get authorized for funding under the community funding area program for fixed route operations by June of 2028. And then the earliest any service changes could take effect, because then we'd have to notify Go Carry of service changes by December of 2028. And they have their 2 times a year cycle that they do bids with their operators. That it could be implemented in the spring of 2029. Now, that's the earliest feasible hypothetical timeline. But that's being generous. Again, it takes staff capacity, it takes cooperation of others, it takes encroachment permits from NCDOT, so just, I'm telling you, it can, this is a 3-year timeline, but that's, again, it's the earliest hypothetical. Okay, so recommendations for next steps. Short term, again, enhance the smart shuttle by adding up to 9 new microtransit nodes in underserved areas, increase the vehicle fleet size to reduce the wait times and improve reliability, and transition to minivans for cost efficiency and ADA compliance. One of the things that we need to be careful about with the nodes, so you see that there's 9 new nodes locations. We didn't say, well, they're going to go exactly right here on the map. We're just identifying general locations where they would go. I mentioned Title VI compliance earlier. I don't know that the town has done this, but we need to. We need to have something that tells us this is how we prioritize our nodes, that is performance driven, rather than just being like, I think it'd be great to have a node right here. Let's start right here. Well, what about over here? We really can't do that. That's a huge Title VI red flag. So we really need to put that together, do a demand analysis to identify the priority node locations and follow that once it's adopted by council. Develop a phased rollout plan for adding vehicles and nodes. Following up from that, explore the creation of an advanced booking option to improve that reliability, especially for seniors, but balance that with those expecting a real-time on-demand option. One of the things you'll see in here, I keep hitting on staff capacity, right? Public transportation is not even really my job. It has been since Caleb left because I was his supervisor and I take on those duties when somebody vacates the position, and so that's what I've done. It is Philip's job, but it's only really half of his job. So when you get into these improvements that you want to have done on a certain timeline, it takes staff capacity, it takes work, it takes effort, and so just keep that in mind. So the transit service or the transit study did suggest hiring a dedicated transit planner to support this, to support community engagement, marketing, and education, administer the service contracts and the funding sources, develop and manage system policies and implementation planning activities, and monitor system performance. And that would be regardless of smart shuttle improvements or fixed route. Long-term, should key market supportive indicators such as hourly ridership and population density suggest its suitability, prepare for a fixed route by developing a fixed route circulator or linear service plan for future implementation and coordinating with regional transit providers for seamless connectivity. So what this is really saying is We don't think we're ready for fixed route. Even if we press the go button today and it takes us 3 or 4 years, we don't think it's appropriate just yet to press the go button on fixed route. But to continue to evaluate the commuting market internal to the town, establish certain thresholds, or look at certain thresholds as catalysts for adding it. Begin the corridor analysis to identify potential alignments and stop locations. So you have the service concepts that the transit study looked at. And again, so those are just conceptual alignment ideas or concepts. Again, under no circumstances have I ever seen in a transit feasibility study the lines on a map that were documented in the study actually be exactly what was implemented. There's always some modification to it as you continue to go through your implementation planning and doing that refinement. And then we would refine operating and capital costs. I'm not going to go through this. I'm not going to hit on this for very long. I shared this with you at one of your I think your November 12th meeting. We are getting more money for transit than we previously did, which is ultimately reducing the town's burden to fund it. $48,000 roughly in 2026 or FY 2026, and beginning in next fiscal year, that's expected to increase to approximately $140,000. That could be used to, that's not tied to anything other than our reporting to the National Transit Database, which is what FTA uses to provide, to calculate funding for urbanized areas throughout the country. So it could be used to supplant existing town contributions or to fund service improvements. It's up to you. So one thing I'll say though is the arrangement that we have with the town of Cary makes it very easy for us to take advantage of this money. If we didn't have that arrangement, we would have to look at, so if you do want to look at another vendor or something like that, we'd have to look at other ways that we could get that money, which might mean more work for staff, potentially an additional burden. But the easiest way you could possibly get that money is how we're getting it right now from the town of Cary. So the big thing that I don't want to go through these in too much detail, but the big thing I want you to take away from these tables that show the planning level operating costs to the town for the different alternatives is the community funding area amount of the cost is going up to 65%, which is reducing what the town, if you stay the same, if what we're doing now, it's reducing what the town is responsible for funding to retain the status quo. And that $140,000 of that Go Carry credit to FTA formula funds is also doing the same. But also keep in mind that that $140,000 can be used as part of the match for the community funding area program funding. Okay, so this is what it would look like. You know, right now, this is what generally where we're at with funding in FY26. At FY26 levels, if we were to look at FY27 and later, if we were to stay the same, this is what the town's contribution would be. So the revenue picture for the town is improving. If this were for the operation of additional vehicles that we laid out in Mayor Colley, this would be for all of it, for the 3 peak and 2 off peak. So not doing the interim click on the dial. So this is what, and that's still less than what you're paying in FY26 dollars today. This is for the neighborhood loop. That's more. But again, when we talk about the fixed route, it does not include if you wanted to do there's also this idea of supplemental microtransit that you could do with fixed route to supplement it. That's tricky because a lot of places that have tried that, one cannibalizes the other and renders the other less productive. And so I don't know, it's something we can investigate further, but it's very, very tricky. But this also doesn't factor in that 10 to 20% paratransit operating expense. And same thing for the neighborhood line, that's less expensive than the circulator and also less than what you're contributing now. Okay. I put up here a decision points, maybe to help guide you a little bit on where we need to go for next steps. I have implementation phases up here. Implementation phase 1, of course, is any changes to the final report for the study and for the council to accept the final results of the study. But what I want to do for the report, based on what you're seeing today, is I want to lay out the fixed route service concepts that we evaluated, that we discarded, and put that in the appendix and go into a little bit more of the why behind their discard. And then also, I want to add the two that I brought to the table today, right? That follow up on the feedback we got November 25th, and also speak to the same on those. I also would like to add some information or even a small chapter on the feasibility constraints that we covered today. Because the current report doesn't really get into a lot of what I covered today. And I think it's important to the decision making, and I think we need to document it. So hopefully you're in agreement with that. That's what I would propose for any changes to the final report. If there's anything else, please let me know, and we can work on getting it in there so that we hopefully can bring it back to you February for acceptance. Do you want to explore any other microtransit service provider vendors that might be able to offer that lower cost, understanding what I mentioned about Go Carry and the rate and how that rate might change, but for the next couple of years, it's going to be at that higher rate, just $3 lower than what we're paying now for the LTVs. Do you want to do 2 vehicles during all service hours by the fall of 2026? You see the questions, so I don't want to necessarily go through them all. And then I think another big question is for direction on next steps for potential long-term implementation of a fixed route concept. The recommendation was to continue to monitor and evaluate the market for fixed route. And that when market conditions point to that as being suitable, we would work toward implementation of it. But you're the boss. We can begin working toward implementation of fixed route service concept now, but knowing the timeline for that, do you want to implement some or all microtransit improvements in the short term? Or just, my recommendation would be, if you do want to do that, then would be yes. Our service has a need now, that it needs improvement now. And I don't know if you want to go another 3 or 4 years with it doing the way it's doing now.
If I could, just real quick, first of all, I want to thank you, Brett. Just great job, great presentation. You're not tooting your own horn, but just for council's information, that $140,000 that we're going to be getting in the future would not be happening without Brett. He spent a tremendous amount of time and effort working with Campo and working with a number of other municipalities, renegotiating an MOU. So I did want to acknowledge that because that took significant time and effort. I think one of the other things that you'll see that you saw from the presentation is one of the main trade-offs between fixed route and no base service is geographic coverage. You get more reliability, you get less geographic coverage. I'm not saying we shouldn't look at fixed route, but just want to put out there that, if you do make that transition or whenever you do make that transition, you are going to be taking something away from someone that got used to it because you are not going to be able to maintain all of your existing nodes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for that point, for those points. Councilmember Scroggins Johnson.
I have been chomping at the bit wanting to comment. First of all, this presentation has been incredibly informative, and it was well illustrated and justified, and the feasibility question is very important to each of us on the council. So well done. Thank you very much. as I'm kind of taking in more of your insights, you know, I've been reading this and I formed some opinions, but it's very interesting to kind of get your insider thinking of how this originates and how it came to be, because I understand that the report is a summary of all of the work, but it did not lead the reader like myself and possibly members of the public to where you are. But with this information, I do agree and support you including additional detail about the routes that were rejected, the routes that were considered in this report, the, the feasibility rationale. I think that is a very nice addition to this final report for study. So I fully support that, and I think that having that all in the same report will stand the test of time, at least this point in time. These were the assumptions, these were the options, these were the regulations, because regulations, as we all know, do change over time. So, and then having that ready by February 24th is fantastic. I do like the idea of the Go Carry turnkey service because it does not impact our staff as significantly as another vendor might. We don't even know what another vendor might require as far as staff and involvement. So you do know what they need now, and so you can plan with that. You understand what their requirements are, and so we can kind of, in my opinion, leave that relationship where it is. I do want to see increased reliability, and converting the minivans would be acceptable, considering though the bikes would be nice to know if we have the capacity to carry some bikes if people wish to do so. And adding, you know, 2 full vans and possibly a third, depending on, you know, if we grow into that need to have a third at peak times. One of the reasons I wanted a fixed route is that people who have employment can't rely on going to work with the on-demand system. And a lot of people do need to be on time, especially in service jobs. And a lot of our residents might work in nearby locations and shopping centers. If they can't get there on time, they're not going to use the shuttle on a regular basis. So the fixed route to me was hopeful that that would reduce the uncertainty. So I definitely would like to explore the reservation option in order to kind of bridge the gap between on-demand uncertainty and reliability. And those are the short-term elements that you've added here. Now, I did want to end my comments with a little bit of looking at a strategic view about fixed route and the CFAP scoring situation. Morrisville is not as big as Cary, and we don't necessarily have dense residents, but we do have high employment density in half the town. And it's unique in Morrisville that a lot of people come from somewhere else and go to Morrisville, and our Morrisville residents come and go to some other employment centers. So really a fixed route in Morrisville only may never prove to be reasonable or feasible. However, we might want to look at a fixed route jointly with Cary. Cary is a very big city. They also have a lot of presence right around us. How many times do we go down Town Hall, Cary, Morrisville, Cary, Morrisville? Also, there is a lot of Cary that surrounds the town. So if we looked at a fixed route in a bigger sense, we might find that there's more opportunities to have a joint service that actually does provide a reasonable fixed route. We might continue to have our vans for our own internal town, but if we did a joint fixed route, that might do something. Now, it looks like the scoring method does not look at joint ventures. It looks at town by town and scoring by it with each town. But that's, since it's long-term, this is something that could be discussed and planned for and looks at potential feasibility with other things. We do that now with fire and police support. And I know that some of the transit plans do this bus rapid transit, and we don't really have that in our town. But maybe this is an opportunity to look at this a little differently in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't know who was next, but I'll just go. Mayor Pro Tem Robati.
Okay. So I think that I'm not interested in a fixed route that cuts service from Kids Creek and Breckenridge. I mean, both of those neighborhoods are huge, and I'm not sure that I don't understand why it would be a red flag to send transit to our two largest neighborhoods. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. As for the other things, I agree with Councilmember Scroggins Johnson. I think that the information that you've added here tonight, and especially why those routes were rejected, was very, very helpful. And if that could be included in the report in the way that you discussed, I'd be ready to accept that report on the study results. I think that another microtransit service provider, I feel like we would have to hire the staff to take care of all the things that Carrie takes care of for us now. And I just think, I think that's just gonna be a wash. It's gonna eliminate any cost savings. But also, I don't think we wanna be in the business of hiring bus drivers and dealing with vehicle maintenance. Like, I just think that if we can get that done for us and the service can be turnkey, that to me is a huge, huge plus. I think that we should just, so 2 vehicles during all service hours in the implementation phase 2 doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think we should just skip over that and go to the 223. And and I definitely think we should convert to minivans as soon as possible. I'm fine with the priority nodes, constructing them by 2027, and okay, so advanced booking options for seniors and persons with disability. This is what I was talking about before when I was talking about the difference between being a commuter service that gets cars off the road and being a mobility service that provides mobility for people that currently are not mobile. So no cars off the road, but more people moving around, right? And this to me is the exact situation that we're talking about there, because offering advanced booking options for seniors and people with disabilities, I'm a huge fan of that. I absolutely think we should do it, but we have to be mindful of the fact that that may cause some service issues with the routes. So that's one of those things where we all have to decide, 7-0, this is going to be the guiding star, is going to be the top priority. And then, I just don't see fixed route as a concept for us. I mean, maybe if we could combine something with Carrie, but, and that would take some cars off the road, because a lot of people come through here from Carrie. So, we might get some cars off the road that way. I mean, people do love their cars. I don't know if I'm willing to put a lot of eggs, by which I mean money, in that basket. So, if you're gonna work on that and you can come to some understanding with them where, you know, it's where, because it's mostly gonna be good for them, right? And so I think if we can come to some kind of understanding, pilot something, not get us ourselves into a crazy contract, then, you know, I might be willing to talk about it, but to me, I just don't think we're a fixed route kind of town.
One thing to follow up just real quick. The Wake Transit plan was just adopted, the new updated Wake Transit plan. And whenever that's done, all of the implementation elements that were developed for it also are updated. And you may have heard before of the Wake Bus plan. I think Mayor Colley certainly has. And Councilmember Johnson, your time, Campo Board. But so one of the things that's interesting is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which was also just adopted, has BRT service on Davis Drive. It doesn't say in there what decade, but within the financial constraints through 2055, it has that. And one argument that is always made with BRT services is, what's the underlying, like, are you going to do some type of underlying fixed route service to establish that market and better understand that market that would build to this more intensive service that would be provided at some point in the future, BRT. So I do think there's an opportunity through the bus plan process for us to look at fixed route service on Davis for sure. And that actually helps you, that gets you over a little bit easier to Breckenridge and potentially Kitts Creek as well. But that's something that I would take away and also look at as an opportunity maybe to inject into the bus plan development process to see what the palatability of that is. In that case, the town wouldn't have to pay anything.
Well, that's right within our budget.
So, but thank you for that. It's an interesting concept that you bring up, and I wasn't thinking about that, but now that both of you have brought that up, I was thinking about opportunities maybe to look at that, so. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Kessling.
So getting back to the previous comments that we were providing, data on income metrics.
You need to, as in you need to.
No, we need more mics.
Yeah, income data metrics. That'd be good. And then I was going to mention the survivorship bias, but I mentioned that in the break. So to answer the questions as best as possible in the order up there, I think it's the short-term microtransit expansion is the only option that prevents the immediate exclusion of residents from the transit network, like Everton was talking about with Breckenridge and Kitts Creek. And essentially, we just need to stop the rationing of rides. I don't like that. I don't necessarily like microtransit. I like fixed route. And the reason why is because people have to fight to get the ride, and we're not helping it if we don't expand it. So that's, I think it's the only feasible option at this time. For the report in the fixed route appendix section, I like that. I'd love to have more information on what will it take to get the fixed route. It was mentioned in your slides, growing suburban communities have a need for flexible strategies. I think growing suburban communities should be designed to reduce car dependency. Transportation issues are land use issues because the way we move through our community is determined by the way we design our community. So with that, for future land use discussions and decisions, I would like for us to be provided with information on how the decisions will enable our transit system to Councilmember Scroggins-Johnson's point about what are we trying to do here. I just want us to be provided with information on how the land use decisions will enable our transit system to take cars off the road, reduce transportation carbon emissions, and continue to provide mobility options for those who need it. And then how would a land use decision increase the community funding area plan funding, right? What sort of things would increase? Basically, create the conditions that will make it work. Like just essentially in that appendix, right? What are the things that we should consider moving forward if we want to have fixed route in the future? To answer some of the other questions, I'm not convinced that we should explore other vendors. I think that's adds more complexity than what's needed. I like adding all the vehicles and switching them over to minivans. I do kind of like that as a phased approach. I think there's a potential data analysis risk. If we do everything all at once, we won't know what has actually improved the service. I mean, we can make a good guess, but I think having those vehicles first and seeing what that looks like makes sense. The other two are the nodes and the alternative booking, or the advanced booking. I'm not sure which one would in that priority, which one would make sense to go with next. But with the advanced booking, I think having some sort of modeling that would show, here's our best guess that if we implemented this, here's what we would expect to see. So that we at least have a baseline for, if we do implement it, is that what we were expecting? Just so that we can maybe have a better idea about what to expect. So I don't necessarily want to go into that one blind, and then obviously if it doesn't work out, taking it away. If people are relying on it, people are using it, people need it, I wouldn't want to take that away. So I think a little bit more vetting of that would be worthwhile. And then just keep adding the nodes. There's one at a time, two at a time, three at a time, 4 to 5 at a time, whatever makes sense. We should be continually doing that year over year. I like Councilmember Scarkins Johnson's point about more coordination with Carrie. Again, with the land use, I want to know what they're doing land use wise. I want to know how their decisions are impacting us. How their land use decisions are impacting our transportation networks. And I thought of this a CAM model for transit. If it's kind of add a P and an O on there, we've got Campo. But definitely for this area with Cary and Morrisville. And then I like the line versus the loop. Just had to put that out there. And then I'd want all of this to remain fare free.
Thank you. Okay. Mayor Colley.
Yeah, we haven't talked about fares at all, but yeah, I'd like to keep it fare free as well, if possible. So the more I think about fixed route, I think of that as they really need the frequent, reliable service. So until
I'm sorry, I can't
can't understand.
Could you either move the mic closer or speak?
I'll do this for now. Is that good?
Way better.
So I think fare free is the way to go. We haven't really talked about that. When it comes to fixed route, I think of that as more of a commuter. Is that still not good?
I'm sorry. The sound is really bad right here. I'm sitting across from you, TJ, and I can't hear you.
Yeah.
I'm kind of nasal too. I'm
No,
sorry.
it's not you.
I-
It's the way the sound
it's
is.
It's not your sound.
There's like an echo or something.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, but then
Is that okay?
That's much better.
Okay, if that's okay with Kayla, okay. So, fare free, please. For fixed route, I think of that as commuter. So until Perimeter Park comes back and we do TOD, I don't think we have the employment centers that will drive internal commuting and stuff from Cary and Cary Depot. I think that the BRT, the timing of that might be good to have a real fixed route, and we'll piggyback on that going forward. I appreciate you bringing this augmented report to us when you finish that up, I'd be happy to. I was ready to accept the study before. I'll be more ready to accept it now. I'd need a little bit more data if it's $40 an hour savings versus $140,000 a year with another vendor. I mean, if it's still turnkey, like Carrie is, that might be worth exploring just for the dollars. But that's more operational, so I'm not saying no to it. I just don't know. You tell me if we can get the same service not using Carrie.
Yeah, there's other turnkey. That's what the assumption is for turnkey at that $85 cost.
So I'm not saying no to that. So if you guys feel like there's a good to look at it, we can do that. As I mentioned earlier, I'd be interested in doing 232 right away rather than phasing that part. Go to minivans for sure. The 4 to 5 priority nodes as soon as possible. I think that'd be nice. And that's going to sort of cancel out the extra vans, but I think that will give people a better feel that we're listening to them. Advanced booking options. I think that the more reliability we give to some, I don't think that's going to damage the reliability for others because they're already not trusting. So at least we can take care of the disabled and the seniors. If that's not something that Wake County already does, do they only do that in the non-incorporated areas or something?
Go Wake Access services are such a hodgepodge and hard to follow. They don't provide ADA service for,
Really?
I mean, the trips that they provide are ADA accessible, like the vehicles are ADA accessible, but they're driven by Medicaid mostly, like they're Medicaid trips. So they would have to be like providing transportation to medical appointments for those eligible for Medicaid. And Medicaid reimburses them for most of their trips. They do provide other trips that have other specific focuses, but those are driven by funding programs that are for specific purposes, and those trips are very limited.
So if that's just something that maybe we as a town can make more available to our users, let them know about it, that takes some of the pressure off. Whatever you do, I'd be okay with the advanced booking options for those. And later on, for implementation 3, more nodes is good, but I already said I wanted the vehicles now. And so, yeah, I don't think fixed route is really reasonable just right now. So I think that's all the questions. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Councilman Garamore.
Again, I think I'm not a fan of right now for fixed route because honestly, we don't have a good data to show the usage. Your first statement was pretty much on par with the CTP we had done 10 years ago, where 18,000 of our people go outside and people come from outside in. So having a fixed route without knowing who's really using it doesn't make any sense to me, because right now we just don't have the data to prove that. And second, I think I would like to know if the $40 versus the $140, that's $100 difference. If you're running 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week, that's good pocket change that we could use 2 of them and make it, or even 3 of them, to make it on par for 140. So that will automatically help us in efficiency and our whole funding model of getting where we are trying to do. And that can also open up more nodes, and because as long as it is within 15-20 minutes, it works. And so that was, for me, I think, I understand the turnkey, and the staff and all those things, if you look at the cost, is this worth pursuing it, would be much, much better. That's one thing. And what else? What else are you looking for me? The report is fine, I think. It's good to go with that amendment. nodes, I think, well thought at, like I think Wegmans and the Walmarts and others, that's basically would drive people. Right now, if you look at it, there's only one shopping complex is Park West. So you see a lot of all neighborhoods going towards it. But if you start exploring more shopping complexes like the Wegmans and the Foot Lions and others, that adds a different group of people. Like, because I know people in Breckenridge don't use a whole lot, but some of who use it go to MAFC. But again, that's those kids whose parents cannot come in time to take them and all those things. But I think this will open up, I think, and exploring more patterns would be really good because that's a good pattern, taking residents towards, and it's both profitable for the small businesses and also vice versa with the convenience of going without a transport. Again, this peak vehicles and all those things, if we can figure out that $40, those whole equations will completely change for me. Yeah, I think the Wake Med is good. By the time I think it will draw more. Yeah, I think that's it. Anything else you need from me?
No, I mean, this is great because I feel like the council is coalescing. I haven't heard from Councilmember Johnson or Patel, but it sounds like we're coalescing around something that we can do. We can bring back in February and yes, do something, move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Councilmember Johnson.
Okay, thank you, Brett. And I'm going to say again, thank you for the presentation, especially the information you gave on Title VI and especially the ADA service requirements. I don't think I understood that. I did not realize that. So I really appreciate that information. So as far as your first kind of question there about the study, yes, I want to accept the final results of the study and include what you're talking about. I think that would enhance the study for the better and for the future too. So those that are going to hopefully look at this in the future will have a better understanding of all the hard work that went into it. So I'm good with all that. I agree with the going out and looking at another service provider, as long as it's turnkey, and that was my question, to verify, was it turnkey or not? Turnkey, yes. I think there's never anything wrong with going out and evaluating and pricing services. So as long as we can get turnkey and it's equivalent and all that good stuff. So I would be interested. I don't know where we end up in the end, but I'd be interested, especially if your figures in your presentation today kind of play out, because there's a significant difference between what potentially is out there versus what we're paying today. So I think that's important to understand, because then maybe we can provide even more to the public. Anyhow, and as far as increasing vehicles and nodes, yes, to all of that, everything you described. I would say though, and I think you talked about doing this, so I'm going to ask to verify this, that we do it kind of incrementally, but quickly incrementally, so that we understand what's really turning the dial and what's really improving, instead of just throwing everything out there and then hoping it all works and then never really understanding. And maybe through the data, you'll understand what worked and what didn't. But I want to really be clear that we understand whether it's increasing the nodes, increasing the vehicles that actually turn this dial and improve the whole system. And I'm yes to the minivans too. And then as far as fixed route, yeah, I'm a no right now. I think in time that will come here. I'm convinced of that. I'm not sure we're there yet. And I like this idea of working with Go Triangle or others to try to provide some kind of a fixed route And especially if it's going through multiple communities, it should not be, it should be Go Triangle. It should be, some other entity that is actually helping with the fixed routes that go through multiple communities. And I'm looking at my notes to make sure I hit on everything. I think that's it. I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one, I forgot. Sorry, before you. Collaboration. In terms of collaboration, I don't see any Go Carry or PTA going towards West Cary. And there's a complete desert area. And if we can partner with them, and also if we have to pay our share for passing through Morrisville or taking Morrisville residents, I think that's a good connect from not only from West Cary, which is in there, it's almost 100,000 people that live in that area, 80,000 or something, but also helps us if there are stops in Morrisville that will connect to the entire Cary side too.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Patel, again in a moment, just to respond to that. The town of Cary has wanted fixed route service in West Cary for some time. But their council never really got to a point where they would fund it or whatever. And Wake Transit, whenever it went through these bus plan iterations, it never really rose to the top. But that area has developed so quickly, so fast, that what we talk about the market being ripe for fixed route being suitable, that's a place, now where I think it's there. There's a lot of major trip generators in West Cary now that didn't used to be there. And so one of the things they did is they did do a microtransit study for the West, where they don't have fixed route in West Cary and South Cary. And because they couldn't get this kind of fixed route concept supported by the Wake Transit program, they were like, okay, we'll look at microtransit and try to implement that. And they have a concept for that, but their council decided not to fund it yet. So they haven't implemented it, but it would be, and that's something that we looked at with this study, but like, where are you at with that? Like, are you planning on doing this anytime soon? The answer we get from them is, don't know, ? But certainly something we want to look at moving forward as well is like, what are they doing with a potential microtransit service in West Cary, and how can that be tied into what Morrisville's doing? Or are they going to look at another fixed route, the viability of fixed route in West Cary, maybe along, it's either Davis Drive or it's E55 or both.
Or Morrisville Carpenter or Macron, because they have to go to the other side,
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it has solid value because we can have a node in a way that our thing goes there, like our transit, our shuttle can go to say MAFC, and if it is passing through Morrisville Parkway, they can connect to that one because it's a fixed route. We know exactly what times they're becoming, or Davis Drive, or many locations. So it's just giving a key to the other side, and Cary might have not approved it because of their reasons, but if we saying we're ready to partner, I know our share will be much less compared to theirs, but I think it's worthwhile because it gives our residents a bigger net to go to, than 9 square miles.
One other point, sorry, Councilmember Patel, that I want to make is so the idea of a turnkey operator, vendor, or whatever, there are other options that would be turnkey outside of Go Cary. I want to be transparent about that. It runs the gamut in terms of what level you want it to be at. Town of Wake Forest, theirs is pretty close to turnkey with VIA, and they're paying in the mid to upper 60s per hour. But some of what they're doing is they're learning the hard way and figuring out, well, we don't necessarily want to do it this way and that. And we have 4 years of experience where we kind of know, we have a little bit of information about what we might be getting into or not that we do or do not want to do. The other thing is, in terms of staffing and vendors and all that, GoCarry, what we do is not completely turnkey with GoCarry. They just do the operations, but there's this whole other world that has to be managed, which is called system level management. So a lot of the things that I pointed out today, like the criteria that we needed to establish for nodes and the Title VI program that has to be developed and administered and all that kind of stuff, that's system level management that GoCarry's not responsible for. They're just getting the drivers, they're procuring the vehicles, they're running the service, and that's it. All the system level stuff we do internally within the town. And there's more that we should be doing that we're not doing. And then, of course, if we expand, then that will kind of scale with it. But just wanted to make that point. Councilmember Patel.
So just to add to what Mayor TJ, Councilmember Garimala, and pretty much almost everybody said, I would like to explore other vendors if we are getting the same level of service. I don't see a reason why we shouldn't explore that option, right? If it's a lower cost. For fixed route, although I'm not in favor of, I heard us talking about Breckenridge and Kids Creek. Is Providence Place included already in it, or?
I'm sorry.
Providence Place. We mentioned that.
We have.
That's also fairly large. That's the third largest neighborhood in the.
Yeah, for Providence Place. You mean an existing node?
No, I'm talking about the fixed route. One of the fixed route options that you showed.
I mean, it would be one of the at least, let me go back. Sorry.
I think it was page 51, if I'm not mistaken.
Just to be sure. Not those, but, sorry. So there's the neighbor, or the neighborhood loop. Not really. And then more so. I mean, it's still not really, but more so. Proximal, but not really hitting it, yeah.
Well, if we ever consider fixed route, then we should include them as well. In terms of, you mentioned that there is a need for additional resource on staff. Is it if we, and I guess regardless of which expansion we go through, whether it's microtransit or fixed route, you still suggesting that we need at least one additional resource for staff?
Yes, yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Okay, and then in terms of fixed route, it really doesn't make sense to me, at least not at this point for town our size. And compared, considering that we are will be spending almost 2.4 million in capital cost, and
it depends on the fixed route, but if you
2 to 3 million in the operating cost.
Yeah, I can go back to those. Yeah, for that one and then this one.
So the question I have is, what would it take to achieve the same level of reliability with microtransit that you get from fixed route? I think 2, 3, 4 more vans, 5 more vans, and what would be the cost compared to what we'll be paying?
So really what we want to do is we want to hit the way we would evaluate that. That's a good question. The way we would want to evaluate that is the wait times. We want to get to 15, the average wait time. We probably want to hit, if we can get to 15 minutes and that's acceptable, that's where you want to be. And then you want your travel times, of course, to stay in that range that they've been in. Those are your metrics of, is this a healthy service that is competitive and useful for people? And then so as we add vehicles, we're monitoring that. Maybe we add 2 vehicles. I don't think we're going to get there just with 2 vehicles, but you also don't want to. My recommendation was to do 2 clicks of the dial with that, just because you don't want to overdo it and then you're spending money on something. It's hard to put something out there and then take it away.
Okay, no, I'm just trying to understand that, or trying to make a point that even if you added 2 or 3 more vehicles, it will be still more cost efficient doing the microtransit than fixed route.
Yes, yeah.
And you won't be taking anything away from residents that you currently offer.
Right.
At least during peak hours, I guess. Somebody made a point, I'm not sure who it was, about people getting to work. And reliability is a big, a big issue right now. But if you can achieve the same level of reliability with the microtransit, then I don't see a need for fixed route. I think, yes, I'm good with adding whatever number of vehicles you have suggested. In terms of nodes, when we add more nodes, I would like to at least consider adding additional nodes in larger neighborhoods, like Breckenridge and Kids Creek and Providence Place, because if you really look at it, where we have a stop or node in Kids Creek, it is closer to residents of Everett Crossing, which is a small townhome community next to it, than somebody living at the far end of Kids Creek. And I'm sure same thing is at Breckenridge, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I would like to see at least we explore that.
We actually got specific public comment on that, in Kids Creek specifically, that we need more than 1 node there, because it's such a large, yeah.
Yeah, and Breckenridge is bigger, so I'm sure they would have the same problem.
Not as much in Breckenridge. I mean, Kids Creek is quite a bit larger than Breckenridge, but Breckenridge.
1,124 homes is Breckenridge, and 827 is Kids Creek. How about the record?
I guess he told you.
He did.
Won't be making that mistake again, I guess.
I'm talking about square acres or square mileage or whatever.
They don't consider that.
But yeah.
So either way, they're both large, and and it will help if there was a second node in these 3 neighborhoods particularly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That tracks with in comment that we got from the public. Some comments. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much it. By the way, thank you for doing the excellent job with the report and also explaining everything to us and answering all our questions with patience.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember Kessling.
I had just a couple last minute comments here. Definitely like to add some information to the report that explain things to our residents in the way that they might better understand. A lot of this stuff can be very complicated, technical, and that sort of thing. An example of that is affordable.
Harrison, they can't hear you.
Can't hear me?
Is your mic on?
Yes.
Mic's on.
We're gonna work on it, sorry.
Thank
Did
you.
I turn it off?
No,
Oh, it's not your fault.
no, it's good.
So the example is affordable housing. So we have the affordable housing plan. If you are a resident that's coming to us and saying, hey, I want affordable housing here, being able to give them that affordable housing plan and say, hey, take a look at this, let us know what you think. I think that would be very, very helpful, but for transit. Hey, we need fixed route. All right, here, take a look at this plan and let us know what you think, and we can work through that together. If we do go with the turnkey solution, I'm assuming that would be a private company. I just wanted to reiterate something that I mentioned earlier, that if we do go with that solution, I wouldn't want it to degrade the pay, safety standards, or job security of the drivers. That's important. And then I'd like to see information on future joint Cary Morrisville transit planning effort in this report. Even if it's just like a nod to it, just kind of open the door to that possibility, because I do think that's a huge opportunity for Morrisville to have more of that coordination, as was mentioned.
So one thing I will, just real quick about the report. So I got a lot of feedback on what to include in the report, and I offered some things up that I think we needed to do. We can do all those things, and those things should be in there. But a lot, if we're talking about like a lot of add-on stuff, we have to be careful, just because there's a scope of work that is under contract with the consultant to do it, and I know there's another entity that's paying for the study and report. So we don't want, let's just be mindful of what makes sense to put in the report for the task at hand, is kind of what I'm getting at.
Future report.
Okay.
You have what you need from us, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to come back in February and with an updated report and a package of recommendations. I do think you all need to think between now and then on the 2 versus doing the 2, and then where you're off a little bit on the council is doing 2 and then 3 later, like the next opportunity, versus all doing 2 and 3 all at once.
So moving from 1 to 1 to 2 to 2, or to 2 3 2.
Yeah.
Is the way to think about it.
Yeah. That's the only area where I sense there's some divergence that probably needs to be resolved, but that's not a big nut to crack. So.
Great, thank you. Well, this has been a really good start to our retreat. Anything for the good of the order, sir?
Yes, I would agree. First and foremost, I think this is a great start to the retreat. Thank you, Brett. I think he's a genius when it comes to this, which makes it easier. But I will say, I got to say, this is one of, if not the most productive work sessions that I've been a party to since I've been here. So thank you all for really digging in, really, investing the time to be prepared and to ask good questions and give good feedback. And we made monumental strides tonight with this. So thank you. I hope that's a great kickoff to the rest of the retreat. And Councilmember Patel, Councilmember Kessling, we will see you out at, what's the name?
150 Perimeter Park Drive.
Eastridge.
Eastridge Building.
So we'll see you at about 10:30, and we'll do an hour on budget overview, and then everyone else, lunch will be available at 11:30. We're going to try to kick off as close to noon as we can, and get as much of the day as we can, because that'll be it for this retreat. But thank you all.
Okay, and casual clothes tomorrow?
Please.
So we're not going to adjourn this meeting. I need a motion to recess until 12 o'clock tomorrow.
I would like to make a motion to recess until 12 o'clock tomorrow.
Or do you want to say 10:30?
Till 10:30 tomorrow.
I plan on going at 10:30. I think it's a team effort. So it's a public meeting, just in case there's a majority.
A friendly amendment to that to make it 10:30
I would like to amend my motion to recess until 10:30.
tomorrow morning. Okay, and a second?
Second.
A motion from Mayor Protem Rabadi, a second from Councilmember Scarlett Johnson to recess until 10:30 tomorrow morning. All those in favor, please say
Council,
aye.
sorry, would you also please add the address into there, just because we are going to a new location?
Sure.
Sorry, thank you.
I would like to amend my motion to recess until 10:30 tomorrow morning at East Bridge at 150 Perimeter Park Drive, Morrisville, North Carolina. Is that everything then? Okay, yes, I would like to amend my motion to that.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, amended motion from Mayor Protem Rabadi and second from Councilmember Scarlett Johnson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries unanimously. We are recessed at 9:24. Thank you.